The ocean floor appears entirely unremarkable. A shallow coastal shelf where sunlight filters down to the water column, throwing a shifting, chaotic net of light across a barren stretch of sand and scattered rock. A small crab scuttles across this empty expanse, its senses alert for any shadow that might betray a predator. The water is clear, the sight lines are open, and there is absolutely nothing to be seen. But the crab has already made a fatal mistake. It trusts its eyes. Without a single ripple of warning, a patch of the seafloor simply peels itself away from the earth. The sand seems to inhale, rising and solidifying into a shape that was there the entire time, hovering merely inches away. It is a cuttlefish, and it does not survive by hiding in its environment. It survives by becoming the environment. In the span of a millisecond, the creature drops its disguise, transforming from a featureless stretch of beige sand into a pulsing, vibrant spectacle of color. It is a masterclass in deception, a biological magic trick executed with such speed and precision that it forces us to question the very nature of visual reality. To understand a cuttlefish is to understand an animal that has weaponized light and color. In the shallow waters it calls home, the visual landscape is never static. Seagrass sways with the tidal surge, casting rhythmic shadows. Sunlight dances on the water's surface, sending shimmering, unpredictable patterns down to the substrate. For most marine animals, this visual noise is a nightmare, a confusing environment that requires constant, exhausting vigilance to separate the background from a creeping threat. But for the cuttlefish, this chaos is an absolute playground. It thrives in the optical confusion because it is the undisputed architect of it. The secret to this unparalleled adaptability lies within the architecture of its skin, a sophisticated, multi-layered canvas that operates unlike anything else in the natural world. This is not the slow, hormonal color change of a reptile. This is a neural symphony, wired directly into one of the most advanced nervous systems found in any invertebrate. Beneath the surface of the cuttlefish's skin lie millions of specialized cells called chromatophores. These are tiny elastic sacs filled with dense pigments of yellow, red, and deep brown. Each individual sac is tethered to a network of radial muscles, which are in turn connected directly to the cuttlefish's brain. When the brain fires an electrical signal, these muscles contract violently, pulling the pigment sacs wide open to display a burst of color. When the muscles relax, the sacs shrink to microscopic dots, rendering the color invisible. Because this system is driven by neurological impulses rather than hormones, the cuttlefish can ripple through its entire color palette in a fraction of a second. It can generate traveling waves of pigment that wash across its mantle, create jagged stripes to break up its outline, or produce intricate mottling that perfectly mirrors the gravel beneath it. But the chromatophores are only the first layer of this deception. Lying just beneath them is a second system of optical manipulation consisting of cells known as iridophores. These cells do not contain pigment. Instead, they contain microscopic stacks of crystalline plates that act as biological prisms. As light penetrates the skin, these plates reflect and refract the rays, producing shimmering, iridescent blues, greens, and silvers that shift and change depending on the angle of the observer. This structural coloration allows a cuttlefish to mimic the metallic glint of fish scales or the scattered reflection of sunlight on water. And deeper still lies a third layer, the leucophores. These are flattened, highly reflective cells that scatter ambient light in all directions. If the cuttlefish swims over bright, white sand, the leucophores automatically bounce that exact wavelength of light back into the environment, perfectly matching the ambient brightness of the surrounding ocean. Working in absolute harmony, these three layers grant the cuttlefish a terrifying level of control over its visual identity. This absolute mastery of appearance serves a dual purpose, functioning as both an impenetrable shield and a devastating weapon. When a cuttlefish transitions from prey to predator, its camouflage shifts into an entirely different gear. Imagine a small crustacean navigating the complex visual clutter of a rocky reef. The cuttlefish does not rely on speed to close the distance. Instead, it relies on a phenomenon known as motion dazzle. As it stalks its target, the cuttlefish's skin erupts into a hypnotic display of traveling light and dark bands, strobing down its body in rapid succession. To the simple nervous system of a crab or a small fish, this rapidly shifting pattern is neurologically overwhelming. The prey's brain struggles to process the conflicting visual data, unable to determine the size, speed, or trajectory of the approaching threat. This sensory overload induces a momentary paralysis, a critical hesitation. That split second of confusion is all the cuttlefish requires. With deliberate stealth, it glides into range. Then, the center of its mass parts, and two specialized feeding tentacles shoot full explosive, lightning-fast acceleration. Lined with serrated suckers, they snatch the prey and drag it back into a powerful, parrot-like beak. The hunt is over before the victim's brain has even processed that an attack has begun. Yet, color and pattern alone are not enough to fool the most discerning eyes in the ocean. A perfectly colored cuttlefish resting on a jagged reef would still look like a smooth, fleshy anomaly against the sharp edges of coral. To truly vanish, the cuttlefish must manipulate the third dimension. It must alter its physical texture. Scattered across its body are specialized muscular hydrostats known as papillae. By precisely contracting the circular muscles at the base of these structures, the cuttlefish can force the tissue upward, transforming its sleek, hydrodynamic skin into a jagged, three-dimensional topography. If it settles on a bed of kelp, it sprouts fleshy, leaf-like protrusions that drift with the current. If it rests on a coral head, it raises rigid, spiky bumps that perfectly mimic the sharp, irregular surface of calcified rock. And when it decides to swim over an open expanse of sand, the muscles relax and the skin pulls tight, returning to an aerodynamically smooth profile. This integration of instantaneous color matching, dynamic pattern generation, and real-time physical texture alteration represents the pinnacle of active camouflage on planet Earth. Of course, in the unforgiving theater of the ocean, even the most perfect disguise can sometimes fail. A keen-eyed predator, perhaps a large reef shark or a cruising dolphin, might catch a subtle disturbance in the water and move in to investigate. When concealment is compromised, the cuttlefish instantly abandons subtlety for shock and awe. It rapidly expands its chromatophores to flash bold, aggressive patterns, often featuring high-contrast eye spots designed to mimic the face of a much larger animal. It flattens its body and flares its arms outward, drastically increasing its perceived size in an attempt to intimidate the attacker. If the bluff fails and the predator lunges, the cuttlefish deploys its ultimate contingency plan. A powerful contraction of its mantle forces a jet of water through a muscular funnel, propelling the animal backward with astonishing speed. Simultaneously, it releases a dense cloud of ink from a specialized sac within its abdomen. But this is not merely a smoke screen meant to obscure vision. The ink is mixed with mucus, forming a cohesive, three-dimensional mass suspended in the water column. This dark, lingering shape, known as a pseudomorph, is roughly the same size and volume as the cuttlefish itself. To a charging predator, it appears as though the prey has suddenly frozen in place. The attacker bites into the phantom decoy, filling its mouth with a chemical deterrent that dulls its senses, while the real cuttlefish, now pale and virtually invisible, jets away to safety. This extraordinary repertoire of survival tactics requires massive processing power, and the cuttlefish possesses a neurological hardware to support it. Cephalopods represent an entirely separate branch of evolutionary intelligence, completely divorced from the vertebrate lineage that led to mammals. The cuttlefish brain is massive relative to its body size, dominated by enormous optic lobes that process an incredibly complex stream of visual data. But intelligence here is not centralized in a single, isolated skull. It is distributed throughout the animal's body. Its complex behaviors, its ability to learn from experience, and its capacity for problem-solving demonstrate a profound cognitive sophistication. It assesses the nature of threat, calculates the visual parameters of its background, and executes multi-step defensive strategies with cold, calculated precision. Perhaps nowhere is this intelligence more evident than in the complex, often treacherous realm of reproduction. For the cuttlefish, mating is a high-stakes game of visual communication and intense competition. When a male encounters a receptive female, he puts on a mesmerizing display, flashing rapid, rhythmic pulses of color across his skin to signal his vitality and intent. But competition on the reef is fierce, and smaller males must rely on their wits to secure a mate when dominated by larger, more aggressive rivals. This has led to the evolution of tactical deception, a behavior that highlights the sheer computing power of the cuttlefish brain. A smaller male may approach a female, displaying the gentle, mottled patterns of courtship on the side of his body, facing her. But if a large, aggressive male swims past on his other side, the courting male will literally split his visual identity down the middle. On the side facing the rival, he displays a drab, unremarkable camouflage of a female, completely suppressing any aggressive visual signals. He is running a dual-monitor deception, a romantic suitor to his right, and a non-threatening female to his left. This ability to selectively communicate different messages to different audiences simultaneously reveals a profound level of social awareness and neurological control. Once mating is successful, the female seeks out a hidden, secure location, often deep within a cluster of seagrass or wedged beneath a rocky overhang, to lay her eggs. The eggs themselves are small, grape-like clusters, anchored firmly to the substrate. But the story of cuttlefish perception begins long before these eggs ever hatch. The casing of the egg is slightly translucent, serving as a foggy window to the outside world. Inside, the developing embryo is not simply waiting in the dark. Its enormous eyes are already formed, already watching the shadows that pass beyond its protective shell. Scientific studies have revealed a phenomenon that borders on the unbelievable: prenatal learning. If a specific type of prey, such as a certain species of crab, frequently walks past the eggs during the embryo's development, the cuttlefish will hatch with an already established preference for hunting that exact prey. Before it has even touched the ocean water, before it has taken its first breath outside the egg casing, it has already observed its environment, recorded visual data, and adapted its future survival strategy based on what it saw through the walls of its own egg. The cuttlefish is a creature caught perfectly in the crosshairs of evolution. It occupies a perilous middle ground in the marine food web. It is a voracious predator, a terror to the small fish and crustaceans that share its habitat, helping to regulate their populations and maintain the balance of the coastal ecosystem. Yet, it is also a highly sought-after meal for apex predators, sharks, dolphins, and large pelagic fish. Because it is hunted by animals with exceptional vision, and because it hunts animals in highly complex environments, it has been subjected to relentless, unforgiving selective pressures. Over millions of years, the cuttlefish had to adapt or be consumed. It sacrificed the heavy, protective shell of its ancient ancestors in exchange for speed, intelligence, and the ultimate cloak of invisibility. As the light begins to fail over the reef, and the sharp lines of the daytime ocean dissolve into the murky shadows of twilight, the cuttlefish continues its silent patrol. It moves like a phantom, its body shifting effortlessly between the textures of rock, sand, and seaweed. Every movement is calculated. Every pulse of color is a deliberate manipulation of the world around it. To the casual observer looking down through the water, there is nothing there at all, just a gentle sway of the current and the empty seabed. But beneath that illusion of emptiness lies an organism that has conquered its environment not through brute strength or impenetrable armor, but through the absolute mastery of perception. It is a predator that dictates the terms of reality, surviving in a hostile world by carefully controlling exactly what others are allowed to see. The tropical coral reef is a landscape of sensory overload. It is a world saturated in brilliant colors, chaotic textures, and relentless, shimmering movement. Sponges, branching corals, swaying gorgonians, and shifting shadows create a labyrinth of visual information that every inhabitant must process in fractions of a second. In this hyper-competitive environment, survival usually dictates one of two evolutionary paths. You either become fast enough to outrun death, or you armor yourself so heavily that death breaks its teeth upon you. But within the vibrant, shifting architecture of the reef, there exists a creature that has rejected both of these paths. It has surrendered speed. It has abandoned armor. Instead, it has chosen to weaponize the very complexity of the reef itself. It survives by exploiting a fatal flaw in the psychology of every animal that swims past it. It relies on the assumption that stillness equates to safety, and that the unremarkable is not worth a second glance. A curious damselfish, vibrant and alert, hovers over what appears to be a lifeless, decaying patch of encrusted rubble. The fish is cautious, its eyes darting, scanning the water column for the sleek, unmistakable silhouette of a predator. Seeing only jagged stone, clumps of drifting algae, and a motionless lump of sponge, the damselfish lowers its guard to peck at a microscopic morsel. In an instant, the water simply implodes. There is no pursuit. There is no visible struggle. There is no warning. The lump of sponge inhales a damselfish with a violent, concussive snap that occurs so quickly it evades the processing speed of the biological eye. One moment the fish is there, and the next, it has been erased from existence. The predator responsible for this instantaneous vanishing act is the frogfish. It is an animal that has perfected the art of deception to such an absolute degree that it spends its entire life masquerading as the very scenery that other creatures are conditioned to ignore. To comprehend the frogfish is to understand the concept of cognitive masquerade. This is not the active, rapid-fire camouflage of the cuttlefish, which matches its background in real time. The frogfish employs a far more insidious strategy. It does not merely try to blend in. It fundamentally destabilizes the concept of recognition itself. When a predator or a prey item looks at frogfish, its brain simply fails to categorize the object as a living organism. The frogfish's body is a masterpiece of asymmetrical, irregular ruin. It lacks the streamlined hydrodynamic shape of a traditional fish. Instead, it is globular, lumpy, and covered in fleshy, branching filaments known as dermal appendages. These structures mimic the chaotic growth patterns of marine algae, the intricate tubes of a sponge, or the tattered edges of decaying organic matter. Its skin is devoid of the smooth, overlapping scales that catch the light and betray the presence of other fish. Instead, it is textured with wart-like projections, deep pores, and mottled pigmentation that perfectly replicate the look of encrusted, rotting coral. By perfectly mimicking the characteristics of death and decay, features associated with the non-living, inert architecture of the reef, the frogfish effectively removes itself from the perceptual field of every other animal in the ocean. It becomes an evolutionary ghost. But invisibility alone is a passive trait, and the frogfish is anything but a passive organism. Beneath this guise of a rotting sponge lies a highly specialized biomechanical hunting apparatus that transforms concealment into a lethal, active manipulation. The frogfish is a member of the anglerfish family, and like its deep-sea cousins, it possesses a built-in fishing rod. The first dorsal spine on its head has been completely repurposed by millions of years of evolution. It has become a flexible, mobile rod known as Elysium. At the very tip of this rod sits a fleshy, highly specialized lure called the esca. Depending on the specific species of frogfish, this lure might resemble a wriggling segmented worm, a transparent ghost shrimp, or even a tiny, struggling fish complete with fake eye spots and fins. This appendage is the heart of the frogfish's predatory strategy, allowing it to run a devastating, dual-layered psychological scam. First, its body convinces a passing fish that the immediate area is perfectly safe, just another boring patch of coral rubble. Second, the lure is deployed to convince that same fish that it has just stumbled upon a free, easy meal. The frogfish can move this lure with astonishing precision. It twitches it, pulses it, and sweeps it in rhythmic patterns that perfectly mimic the distressed, erratic movements of injured prey. The frogfish itself remains locked in absolute, stone-like paralysis. It does not breathe heavily. It does not adjust its fins. It simply waits, a living trap set within the stone. When a target, hypnotized by the dancing lure, moves into strike, the frogfish unleashes one of the most extreme physical movements ever recorded in vertebrate biology. The strike of a frogfish does not rely on biting or grabbing. It relies on the physics of fluid dynamics and negative pressure. When the prey crosses an invisible threshold, an execution zone located mere millimeters from the frogfish's mouth, the predator initiates a massive, explosive expansion of its buccal cavity. The jaw bones drop, the floor of the mouth plunges downward, and the sides of the head flare outward simultaneously. This creates a sudden, massive void inside the frogfish's mouth. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the surrounding ocean immediately rushes in to fill that void, carrying the unsuspecting prey along with it. This entire mechanical sequence, the opening of the jaws, the creation of the vacuum, the ingestion of the prey, and the snapping shut of the mouth, occurs in under 6 milliseconds. To put that into perspective, it takes a human being roughly 300 milliseconds to blink an eye. The frogfish's attack is 50 times faster. It is so rapid that the prey is engulfed, trapped, and sealed in darkness before its own nervous system can even register that the surrounding water is moving. The jaw closes, the water settles, and the lump of sponge returns to its motionless vigil, leaving absolutely no evidence that an attack ever took place. Because its entire survival depends on maintaining this perfect, motionless illusion, the frogfish has had to make a profound evolutionary trade-off. It has almost entirely sacrificed the ability to swim. A fish that swims looks like a fish, and looking like a fish is a death sentence for an ambushed predator whose disguise relies on looking like a rock. Consequently, the frogfish has repurposed its anatomy for a completely different mode of transportation. Its pectoral and pelvic fins have evolved thick, muscular bases and joint-like structures, effectively functioning as rudimentary arms and legs. When a frogfish needs to move, it does not glide gracefully through the water column. It walks. It hauls its bulbous, asymmetrical body across the reef substrate, carefully placing one fin in front of the other, gripping the coral like a toad crawling over wet stones. This slow, deliberate creeping minimizes the disturbance of the surrounding water and preserves the integrity of its camouflage. If it is suddenly threatened and forced to abandon its disguise, the frogfish employs a crude but effective emergency escape mechanism. It gulps water into its mouth and forcefully expels it through tiny, specialized gill openings located behind its arms, creating a burst of jet propulsion that pushes it clumsily but quickly away from danger. It is an awkward, desperate maneuver, heavily emphasizing that the frogfish's true domain is not the open water, but the static, silent surface of the reef. Despite its outward appearance of passivity, the frogfish is deeply attuned to its environment. It does not blindly cast its lure and hope for the best. Embedded along its irregular, lumpy sides is a highly sensitive lateral line system, a network of mechanoreceptors capable of detecting the most microscopic changes in water pressure. As a fish swims nearby, its tail beats create faint, rhythmic pressure waves that travel through the water. The frogfish can feel these waves long before it can see the animal, allowing it to calculate the size, speed, and trajectory of the approaching target. While its camouflage often conceals its eyes, those eyes possess acute visual clarity, enabling the predator to perfectly time the deployment of its lure and the subsequent milliseconds-long strike. The integration of this invisible sensory web with its physical disguise ensures that the frogfish is not just a hidden object, but a highly responsive, finely tuned biological minefield. The life cycle of the frogfish introduces a brief, perilous interruption to its solitary, cryptic existence. To reproduce, these masters of isolation must break their cover and seek out a mate. This is a moment of extreme vulnerability. As they move across the reef to find a partner, their disguise is compromised, exposing them to the sharp eyes of larger predators like Moray eels and groupers. Once a pair is formed, the female releases a massive, buoyant ribbon of eggs, often encased in a protective, gelatinous matrix. This egg mass unspools into the water column and drifts away on the pelagic currents. This dispersal strategy is critical, ensuring that the offspring are carried far from their parents to colonize new, distant reef systems. As the eggs hatch, the tiny, translucent larvae drift in the open ocean, vulnerable and exposed. But as they mature and eventually settle back down onto the hard substrate of a coral reef, their genes activate the remarkable transformation. They begin to grow the dermal appendages, the asymmetrical lumps, and the complex pigmentation required for Masquerade. They transition from helpless, drifting plankton into the ultimate architects of ambush. The ecological footprint of the frogfish is profound, rippling through the complex trophic network of the coral reef. By existing as a hidden, unpredictable threat, they exert a constant psychological pressure on the smaller inhabitants of the ecosystem. The mere presence of frogfish shapes the behavior, foraging patterns, and movement of countless prey species. Because any patch of sponge or clump of algae could secretly harbor a microscopic black hole capable of inhaling a fish in 6 milliseconds, the grazers and foragers of the reef are forced to remain constantly vigilant, inadvertently affecting where algae is consumed and how nutrients are cycled through the environment. Furthermore, the extreme specialization of the frogfish makes it highly sensitive to the health of the reef itself. It requires the complex, three-dimensional architecture of healthy coral to provide the backdrop for its masquerade. When reefs degrade due to climate change, pollution, or destructive fishing practices, the vibrant, chaotic backdrop turns into flat, bleached wastelands. In a dead reef, a rock that looks like a living sponge suddenly stands out, stripping the frogfish of its primary defense and rendering it highly vulnerable. As the sun arcs across the sky and the shifting shadows of the reef lengthen into the subdued hues of twilight, the visual complexity of the coral environment deepens. The boundaries between rock, plant, and animal blur into an indistinguishable tapestry of silhouettes. Within this darkening world, the frogfish remains perfectly anchored, a master of stillness. Smaller fish continue their frantic, endless routines, navigating the labyrinth of the reef with absolutely no awareness of the silent, waiting violence hidden in plain sight. They swim inches from the lethally beautiful lure, completely blind to the threat. In this suffocating stillness lies the true, terrifying brilliance of the frogfish. It is an organism that has conquered the relentless arms race of the ocean not by becoming the strongest, the fastest, or the most venomous, but by weaponizing the psychology of perception. It transforms the safety of the reef into an illusion, proving that in the ruthless theater of the natural world, survival often belongs to the creature that can most effectively erase itself from the minds of everyone else. A predator's charge halts with almost mechanical precision, as if it collided with an invisible barrier of solid glass. A sleek, muscular reef hunter, accelerating toward what should be an effortless, guaranteed capture, suddenly veers away at the very final fraction of a second. It abandons its pursuit despite the prey remaining fully exposed in the open water. The small, brilliantly orange fish that triggered this explosive chase does not flee into the dark crevices of coral, nor does it vanish into the labyrinth of the reef's architecture. Instead, it swims calmly, almost provocatively, directly into the waving, fleshy tentacles of a sea anemone. To every other inhabitant of the coral reef, this environment is universally recognized as a lethal, impenetrable boundary. The predator hesitates at the perimeter, circles briefly in a state of visible frustration, and retreats into the blue. What appears to a casual observer as a reckless, suicidal dive is, in reality, one of the ocean's most sophisticated and absolute ecological deceptions. The clownfish survives not by hiding from the world, but by occupying a biological fortress that only it can safely enter, exploiting a deadly, indiscriminate weapon system that functions as a lethal trap for every other creature in the sea. Within the vibrant, fiercely competitive complexity of tropical coral reef ecosystems, survival almost always depends on speed, camouflage, or heavy physical armor. The clownfish, quite conspicuously, possesses none of these conventional defenses. Its bright, high-contrast orange and white coloration makes it a highly visible target rather than a concealed one. It is a slow, relatively clumsy swimmer, offering very little chance of outrunning the agile, torpedo-like predators that constantly patrol the reef's edge. Yet, this apparent, glaring vulnerability masks a remarkable evolutionary strategy that is entirely rooted in the invisible world of chemical communication and mutualistic symbiosis. The clownfish has traded physical speed for biochemical genius. To understand the magnitude of this deception, one must first understand the true, terrifying nature of the sea anemone. Though it looks like a harmless, underwater flower swaying gently in the tidal currents, it is actually a stationary, carnivorous predator armed with thousands of stinging tentacles. It creates a zone of absolute exclusion that most marine organisms instinctively know to avoid. The surface of every single tentacle is lined with thousands of microscopic, highly specialized cells called cnidocytes. Inside these cells lie structures known as nematocysts, which function as spring-loaded, microscopic harpoons kept under immense osmotic pressure. When these cells are triggered by mechanical contact or the specific chemical signature of fish flesh, the structure discharges with explosive, unimaginable speed. The harpoon penetrates the skin of the intruder and injects a highly potent cocktail of neurotoxins designed to paralyze and kill. For the vast majority of reef inhabitants, even a brief, accidental brush against these tentacles results in immediate, agonizing immobilization and death. The clownfish, however, defies this universal lethal rule. It does not possess a thick, armored skin, nor is it naturally immune to the anemone's venom. Instead, it utilizes a highly specialized mucus coating that completely alters the chemical dialogue between the predator and the host. Rather than stimulating the anemone's defensive response, the chemical composition of the clownfish's mucus actively suppresses the discharge of the nematocysts. It effectively strips the chemical triggers from its own skin, rendering the fish entirely invisible to the anemone's biochemical sensory system. To the sea anemone, the clownfish does not register as a meal, It does not register as fish flesh at all. It registers as nothing more than the anemone's own tentacles rubbing against themselves. This life-saving biochemical cloak is not entirely innate at birth. It must be meticulously acquired and maintained through a delicate, highly dangerous acclimation process. When juvenile clownfish first settle onto the reef from the open ocean, they must find an unoccupied anemone or integrate into an existing colony. They approach the lethal tentacles with extreme, calculated caution. The tiny fish performs a series of tentative, fleeting contacts, a brief brush of the ventral fin, a quick tap of the tail. With each microscopic exposure, the clownfish purposely subjects itself to minor stings, slowly stimulating the production of its specialized mucus, while simultaneously incorporating the specific chemical signature of that individual host anemone into its own biological coating. Through this agonizing dance, the fish gradually becomes chemically integrated into the anemone's identity. The deception is purely ecological rather than visual. It operates entirely through the manipulation of the biochemical signals that determine friend from foe in the dark, silent language of the reef. Once fully established within the protective embrace of the anemone, the clownfish gains access to a permanent sanctuary that dictates and reshapes its entire life history. The dense forest of tentacles serves as a highly effective, impenetrable deterrent against predators, creating a defensive perimeter that virtually no other species is willing to breach. This absolute refuge allows the clownfish to devote its biological energy to foraging, reproduction, and complex social interaction, rather than wasting calories on the constant, exhausting vigilance required of other small reef fish. However, the laws of nature demand balance, and this relationship is far from one-sided. The clownfish does not merely squat within the anemone. It actively contributes to the well-being and survival of its host, forming a mutualistic partnership that significantly enhances the fitness of both participants. By constantly swimming and weaving among the tentacles, the clownfish functions as a living water pump. It dramatically increases the circulation of oxygen-rich water deep into the anemone's core, improving respiration and facilitating the rapid removal of metabolic waste. The fish acts as a vigilant, aggressive sentry, fearlessly charging at and deterring predators like butterfly fish and sea turtles that actively seek to graze on the anemone's soft tissues. Furthermore, the clownfish provides a direct, highly concentrated source of nutrients through its excreted waste. In the nutrient-poor waters of the tropical reef, the ammonia excreted by the clownfish supplies essential nitrogen that directly supports the explosive growth of symbiotic, microscopic algae residing within the anemone's own cells. These algae, known as zooxanthellae, perform photosynthesis, producing vital organic compounds and sugars that heavily supplement the anemone's nutritional intake. Through this intricate, tightly woven alliance, the clownfish and the anemone operate less like two separate animals and more like a single, highly efficient, self-sustaining biological engine. This intricate alliance extends far beyond simple, day-to-day cooperation. It fundamentally dictates the bizarre, rigidly controlled social structure and reproductive dynamics of clownfish populations. Because the anemone represents a finite, highly restricted amount of safe territory, clownfish cannot afford the chaotic, free breeding systems of other species. They live in strict hierarchical groups centered exclusively around a single host anemone. At the very top of the social ladder sits a single dominant breeding female. She is always the largest and most aggressive fish in the colony. Below her is a single, slightly smaller breeding male. The rest of the colony consists of non-breeding, subordinate males that are stunted in their growth by the constant psychological and physical intimidation of the dominant pair. The true evolutionary marvel of this social structure reveals itself only when tragedy strikes. Should the dominant female be killed by a predator or die of old age, the colony does not collapse, nor does the male abandon the anemone to search the vast, dangerous reef for a new mate. Instead, the breeding male undergoes profound, irreversible biological transformation. He rapidly changes sex, absorbing his own testicular tissue and developing active ovaries, physically transforming into the new dominant female. This phenomenon, known scientifically as protandrous hermaphroditism, is an elegant evolutionary solution to the problem of geographic isolation. It ensures absolute reproductive continuity within the heavily limited, isolated space provided by the host anemone. Once the male completes his transformation into the matriarch, the largest is subordinate. Stunted males rapidly undergoes a growth spurt and ascends the social hierarchy to become the new breeding male. This system maintains a highly stable, ruthlessly efficient method of population regulation, proving that the symbiotic relationship with the anemone shapes not only the clownfish's survival mechanisms, but the very foundation of its biology and social behavior. A deeper exploration of this relationship reveals an additional, cascading layer of ecological influence. By centralizing their entire existence around the anemone, clownfish create highly localized zones of intense biological productivity within the broader reef ecosystem. Their feeding behavior, darting out to catch passing zooplankton and returning to tentacles to consume it, generates a steady rain of organic debris. This debris falls into the crevices beneath the anemone, supporting a hidden community of detritivores, crabs, and worms. The constant, flashy movements of the bright orange fish act as a visual lure, attracting larger planktonic organisms that may inadvertently drift too close and become prey for the anemone itself. This highly specific microhabitat fosters increased, concentrated biodiversity, illustrating perfectly how a single, specialized symbiotic partnership can ripple outward to affect the broader community dynamics of the entire reef. The presence of a healthy clownfish colony has even been proven to stimulate the physical growth and expansion of the host anemone, reinforcing the absolute mutual dependence that characterizes their association. Predators that encounter clownfish are confronted with a profound, often paralyzing behavioral dilemma. The visual cues of the small, brightly colored fish transmit the universal signal of a highly profitable, easy meal. Yet, the surrounding halo of the sea anemone represents a significant, potentially lethal risk. Some predators attempt to exploit the brief moments when the clownfish ventures slightly beyond the protective canopy of the tentacles to snatch a piece of floating plankton. But the fish's intimate, spatial familiarity with its host allows it to snap back into the stinging embrace with remarkable speed and precision. This dynamic creates a persistent, high-stakes tension in predator-prey interactions. The apparent, tantalizing accessibility of the clownfish contrasts sharply with the hidden, catastrophic danger of its refuge. The resulting hesitation in the predator's mind is often the exact fraction of a second that determines the outcome of the encounter, illustrating how deception, when rooted deeply in an ecological context, can be vastly more effective than any form of physical defense. However, the narrative of the clownfish is not one of absolute invulnerability. There are severe energetic and physiological costs associated with maintaining this highly specialized symbiosis. Constantly producing and maintaining the specialized mucus coating requires a massive, continuous metabolic investment from the fish. Furthermore, the absolute necessity of remaining within a few inches of the anemone severely restricts the clownfish's foraging range, forcing it to rely entirely on whatever food the ocean currents happen to bring past its doorstep. More pressingly, this incredibly tight association exponentially increases the species' vulnerability to large-scale environmental stressors. As ocean temperatures rise due to climate change, the symbiotic algae living within the anemone become stressed and are expelled, causing the anemone to bleach and shrink. Without a healthy host, the clownfish is left completely exposed, stripped of its biological fortress, and uniquely incapable of surviving the open reef. The clownfish's absolute reliance on its host exemplifies an evolutionary trade-off in which extreme specialization ensures almost guaranteed survival under stable conditions, while simultaneously guaranteeing total collapse in the face of rapid ecological change. As the tropical sun sets and the brilliant, chaotic light of the shallow reef transitions into dim, shadowy blue of twilight, the anemone's tentacles continue their slow, rhythmic dance in the gentle nighttime current. The predators of the night ship begin their patrols, their dark silhouettes passing cautiously around the stinging, toxic perimeter of the colony. Deep within this living, breathing fortress, the clownfish settle in for the night. They tend to their hidden clusters of eggs glued to the rock at the base of the anemone, fanning them meticulously with their pectoral fins to ensure a steady flow of oxygen. The partnership endures through the endless cycles of day and night, embodying a delicate, microscopic balance forged by millions of years of relentless coevolution. The enduring image of the clownfish is one of highly calculated, paradoxical security. It is a fragile-looking, terrible swimmer, thriving happily within the lethal embrace of a creature that embodies sudden, agonizing death for almost everything else in the sea. This alliance fundamentally transforms a lethal boundary into a private sanctuary, completely redefining the rules of engagement and survival within the coral reef. The clownfish does not merely evade predation, it actively reshapes the ecological landscape by inhabiting a space that the rest of the world perceives as entirely inaccessible. In doing so, it reveals a fundamental, beautiful truth about life in the natural world. Survival often depends not on how hard you can bite or how fast you can swim, but on your ability to decode, navigate, and ultimately manipulate the hidden chemical systems that govern perception and interaction. By wrapping itself in a cloak of stolen identity, the clownfish exemplifies the profound, world-altering power of ecological deception, proving that the safest place in a dangerous world is often right inside the jaws of the danger itself. A sleek, highly efficient predator patrols the sun-dappled canopy of a shallow seagrass meadow. Its eyes are finely tuned evolutionary instruments, calibrated to detect the universally recognized signatures of vulnerable prey: the sudden panic flash of silver scales, the erratic darting of a fleeing silhouette, or the sharp, directional acceleration that betrays a beating tail. The hunter sweeps through the swaying green blades, passing within mere inches of a small, twisting fragment of vegetation. The fragment drifts aimlessly, caught in the gentle rhythm of the tidal surge. The predator's gaze washes over it, categorizes it as irrelevant, inanimate debris, and moves on, completely unaware that it has just overlooked a meal. The creature left behind in the predator's wake is the seahorse. It survives a relentless, unforgiving gauntlet of the coastal ocean by employing a survival strategy so radically different from its peers that almost defies biological logic. The seahorse endures by staging a total rebellion against its own anatomy. It completely and utterly refuses to look, swim, or behave like a fish. In the densely packed, visually overwhelming architecture of coral reefs and seagrass beds, the margin between life and death is often measured in millimeters and milliseconds. For the vast majority of fish, survival in these environments dictates a reliance on explosive speed, the safety of massive, synchronized schools, or complex, disruptive coloration that breaks up their outline against the reef. The seahorse has abandoned every single one of these conventional tactics. It is an excruciatingly slow swimmer. It is entirely solitary, and it makes no attempt to outrun danger. Instead, it has committed itself to an evolutionary path defined by the absolute manipulation of expectation. It survives by exploiting profound, inherent blind spot in the cognitive processing of oceanic predators. This deception begins with a fundamental reorientation of the body. While almost all other fish navigate the water horizontally, presenting a streamlined, torpedo-like profile to minimize drag, the seahorse stands upright. This vertical posture immediately and drastically separates it from a visual template that predators are neurologically wired to recognize as food. By maintaining this rigid, upright stance, the seahorse seamlessly aligns itself with the vertical stems of the seagrass and the ascending, branching structures of soft corals. It effectively dissolves its biological identity into the geometry of the surrounding habitat. To a passing threat, the seahorse does not register as concealed animal. It registers as a continuation of the plants. But the illusion of shape is useless if it is shattered by the wrong kind of movement. Predatory fish are acutely sensitive to the hydrodynamic ripples and visual cues generated by the sweeping tails and pulsing fins of typical prey. The seahorse subverts this detection system by completely altering the mechanics of its locomotion. It does not swim, it hovers. Propulsion is achieved through the rapid, almost invisible oscillation of a tiny, translucent dorsal fin located on its back, fluttering at up to 70 times a second. Microscopic pectoral fins situated just behind its eyes act as delicate rudders, providing extraordinary pinpoint stabilization. This highly specialized mode of transit allows the seahorse to move with surgical precision while generating virtually zero hydrodynamic noise. It does not disrupt the water column. It slips through it. By perfectly synchronizing its slow, deliberate drifting with the natural, rhythmic sway of the ocean current, the seahorse becomes functionally indistinguishable from the background clutter, a hydrodynamic ghost drifting through a forest of green. Maintaining this vertical illusion, however, presents a significant biomechanical challenge. An ordinary fish forced to hover upright in a moving current would rapidly exhaust its musculature. The seahorse solved this problem through a radical restructuring of its anatomy. It has entirely discarded the typical arrangement of fish scales. Instead, its body is encased in a rigid, interlocking matrix of bony plates, arranged in distinct rings that run from the base of its head down to the tip of its tail. This lightweight, external armor acts as a structural exoskeleton. It provides formidable protection against the crushing jaws of small predators, but more importantly, it supports the animal's vertical posture without requiring constant, exhausting muscular effort. Perhaps the most iconic feature of this armored anatomy is the prehensile tail. In a brilliant feat of evolutionary repurposing, the caudal fin, the tail fin used by almost all other fish for propulsion, has been completely lost. In its place, the lower spine has elongated and developed the ability to curl and grasp, functioning much like the tail of a primate. This tail serves as a vital anchoring mechanism. By wrapping its tail securely around a blade of seagrass or a branching coral, the seahorse can lock itself into the environment. It can remain perfectly stationary, weathering strong tidal currents and surging waves without expending a single calorie on swimming. Anchored to the substrate, it further cements its disguise, blurring the line between where the plant ends and the animal begins. Yet, beneath this passive, heavily armored, plant-like exterior lies the biology of a ruthlessly efficient, highly specialized assassin. The seahorse may be a master of hiding, but it is also a voracious predator in its own right. Its diet consists primarily of microscopic crustaceans, copepods, and tiny misted shrimp that drift through the water column. Because the seahorse is far too slow to chase these agile organisms down, it must rely on absolute stealth and an incredibly specialized feeding mechanism known as pivot feeding. The seahorse's elongated, tubular snout is effectively a high-velocity biological vacuum. When a tiny crustacean unknowingly drifts within striking range, the anchored seahorse does not lunge. Instead, it slowly, imperceptibly angles its head. Then, utilizing a specialized mechanism of elastic energy stored in its neck muscles, the seahorse rapidly snaps its head upward while simultaneously expanding its buccal cavity. This action creates a sudden, intense suction force at the tip of the snout, drawing the prey into its toothless mouth in under a millisecond. It is one of the fastest feeding strikes recorded in the entire aquatic world. Crucially, the extreme speed and localized nature of the strike generate almost no disturbance in the surrounding water. The seahorse can execute a lethal ambush and return to its perfect, statuesque pose before any nearby predator even registers that a movement occurred. It is a system that demands both the patience of a sniper and the mechanical precision of a trap. To further deepen the illusion, the seahorse possesses an astonishing degree of control over its physical appearance. It is not locked into a single static camouflage. Embedded within its skin are specialized chromatophores, pigment cells that can expand and contract to alter the animal's color, allowing it to seamlessly match the shifting seasonal hues of the seagrass or the vibrant tones of the coral reef. But the Masquerade goes far beyond simple color matching. Many species of seahorse are capable of growing elaborate, fleshy skin filaments and branching appendages that perfectly mimic the textured, irregular appearance of algae, kelp, or colonial hydroids. This is not merely blending in. This is active, structural misidentification. By wearing the exact textures of the reef, the seahorse actively exploits the cognitive shortcuts of its predators, forcing their brains to process the visual data as inanimate vegetation. This requirement for absolute stillness and perfect environmental awareness places an immense demand on the seahorse's sensory systems. If it turns its head to look for prey or watch for danger, it breaks the illusion of being a rigid plant. Evolution has solved this by granting the seahorse the ability to move its eyes entirely independently of one another. Like a chameleon of the sea, one eye can swivel forward to carefully track a microscopic shrimp drifting near its snout, while the other eye rotates backward to monitor the shadowy silhouette of a stingray passing overhead. This provides the seahorse with continuous, nearly panoramic field of vision, allowing it to maintain supreme situational awareness without ever twitching a muscle in its neck. However, the most profound evolutionary twist in the narrative of the seahorse lies not in how it hides or how it hunts, but in how it reproduces. It completely upends the traditional reproductive roles of the vertebrate kingdom. In the world of the seahorse, It is the male who endures the extreme physiological demands of pregnancy. The courtship between a male and female seahorse is an intricate, deeply synchronized ritual that can last for days, involving synchronized swimming, rapid color changes, and intertwined tails. Once the pair is bonded, the female transfers her eggs into a highly specialized, vascularized brood pouch located on the front of the male's abdomen. The moment the eggs are deposited, the male fertilizes them and the pouch seals shut. For the next several weeks, the male seahorse is truly pregnant. The inner lining of the pouch acts like a biological placenta, enveloping the embryos in a dense network of capillaries. The male's body supplies the developing young with oxygen, essential nutrients, and vital osmoregulatory support, carefully controlling the salinity of the fluid inside the pouch to slowly acclimate the embryos to the surrounding ocean water. By taking on the immense physical burden of pregnancy, the male allows the female to immediately begin producing her next batch of eggs, maximizing the reproductive output of the pair in an environment where survival rates for juveniles are staggeringly low. When the gestation period is complete, the male undergoes intense, visible muscular contractions, violently thrusting his body forward to expel dozens, sometimes hundreds of fully formed, perfectly miniature seahorses into the current. From the exact moment they leave the pouch, the tiny offspring are entirely independent, equipped with the armor, the prehensile tails, and the instinctual camouflage necessary to begin their own lifelong masquerade in the seagrass. Despite the brilliance of these adaptations, the seahorse's highly specialized nature is also its greatest vulnerability. Because they are incredibly weak swimmers, relying on specific patches of vegetation for anchorage and camouflage, they exhibit strong sight fidelity. A seahorse may spend its entire life within a few square meters of reef or meadow. This makes them exceptionally susceptible to habitat destruction. As coastal development, agricultural runoff, and climate change decimate the world's seagrass beds and coral reefs, the seahorse is left entirely exposed, stripped of the architectural complexity it requires to survive. Furthermore, they are relentlessly harvested for the traditional medicine trade, the aquarium industry, and as dried curiosities, placing immense, unnatural pressure on their populations. Because of the profound sensitivity to their surroundings, seahorses serve as crucial indicator species. The sudden collapse of the local seahorse population is often the first silent alarm that an entire coastal ecosystem is dying. As the tide shifts and the golden light of the late afternoon filters down to the wavering, rhythmic canopy of the seagrass meadow, the seahorse remains perfectly anchored. Its silhouette is indistinguishable from the swaying blades that surround it. Tiny crustaceans drift blindly past its snout, captured with silent, imperceptible precision, while massive predators continue their endless, hungry patrols, completely oblivious to the hidden presence hovering right beside them. The scene encapsulates a profound, humbling evolutionary lesson. In the unforgiving depths of the ocean, survival is not always the exclusive domain of the strongest, the fastest, or the most aggressive. Sometimes, the most absolute dominance is achieved through the subtle, masterful art of misdirection. By utterly refusing to conform to the biological archetype of the fish, the seahorse secures its place within the intricate, dangerous tapestry of marine life. It exists in a permanent state of quiet resilience, suspended gracefully in the gentle rhythm of the sea. It embodies an evolutionary strategy that fundamentally transforms physical vulnerability into an impenetrable advantage through the masterful manipulation of perception. Its very existence challenges our deepest assumptions about what it means to be seen in the natural world, proving that the ultimate defense is not the ability to fight or to flee, but the breathtaking power to simply be overlooked. A small reef fish, driven by the relentless instinct to find shelter from the open water, weaves confidently through a dense, chaotic forest of coral. It seeks a moment of respite, a place where the shadows offer protection from the cruising predators of the blue. Ahead, it spots what appears to be a sanctuary, a cluster of soft, brightly colored petals swaying with an almost hypnotic grace in the gentle tidal surge. To the visual processing center of the fish, this object registers as entirely benign. It lacks the sharp hydrodynamic lines of a hunter. It has no forward momentum, no snapping jaws, no focused eyes. It looks like a plant, a decorative, harmless fragment of the ocean's background. The fish brushes against the delicate fronds. In a fraction of a second, the illusion of safety violently collapses. The fish's body violently convulses, its muscles instantly locking into rigid paralysis as invisible, microscopic weapons fire from every conceivable direction. The delicate, waving petals transform into a lethal, inescapable snare. There is no desperate chase, no tearing of flesh, no dramatic struggle. The paralyzed fish is simply drawn backward, inexorably pulled toward a hidden, gaping mouth at the center of the living bloom. What appeared to be a beautiful, passive decoration is revealed to be an ambush engineered entirely through stillness. This is a sea anemone, a predator that does not chase its prey, but simply waits for the world to tragically misinterpret its beauty. The coral reef is an arena of absolute, unforgiving competition, where survival is almost exclusively dictated by speed, heavy armor, or active, shifting camouflage. Yet, the sea anemone dominates its environment while possessing none of these conventional evolutionary advantages. It is permanently anchored to stone. It cannot pursue a fleeing meal, nor can it retreat when confronted by danger. Instead, it has evolved a survival strategy that completely upends the rules of engagement, transforming total immobility into absolute, terrifying power. Its cylindrical body, crowned with a dense ring of trailing tentacles, creates the perfect visual symmetry of a blooming flower. This appearance is not mimicry in the traditional biological sense. The anemone is not trying to imitate a specific, harmless species. Instead, it is exploiting a massive, systemic cognitive shortcut hardwired into the brains of almost every animal on the reef. It preys upon the universal assumption that stationary, plant-like, soft body forms are inherently safe. By inhabiting this false aesthetic category, the anemone converts softness into a highly functional, devastating predatory advantage. Beneath this tranquil, hypnotic exterior lies what is arguably the most sophisticated and terrifying weapon system in the entire animal kingdom. The surface of every single tentacle is heavily armed with thousands upon thousands of highly specialized cells known as cnidocytes. Inside these microscopic cells lie the true instruments of death, the nematocysts. These are incredibly complex, subcellular capsules that function as spring-loaded, hollow harpoons. They are kept under unimaginable internal osmotic pressure, acting like biological landmines waiting for a trigger. And that trigger is excruciatingly sensitive. It requires only the microscopic mechanical friction of a passing fin, or the faint chemical signature of fish flesh in the water. When that threshold is crossed, the nematocyst discharges. The speed of the cellular firing is so extreme that it operates at the absolute physical limits of biological capability, occurring in mere fractions of a microsecond. The barbed thread ejects, penetrating the scales and skin of the prey, and instantly pumps a highly complex, devastating cocktail of neurotoxins into the victim's bloodstream. These toxins are specifically engineered to completely disrupt nerve function and aggressively break down cellular membranes. Small fish and invertebrates are immobilized almost instantly, their nervous systems short-circuiting under the chemical assault. Once the prey is entirely subdued, the anemone's tentacles execute a slow, coordinated contraction, folding inward to guide the meal into its central mouth. Digestion occurs within a central gastrovascular cavity, a hollow interior that serves double duty as both a stomach and a primitive circulatory system. By relying entirely on this microscopic, chemical artillery, the sea anemone completely bypasses the massive energy expenditures required by active hunters. It invests all of its metabolic resources into maintaining a state of perpetual, lethal readiness, waiting for the ocean currents and chaotic, crowded nature of the reef to deliver unsuspecting victims directly into its snare. Yet, to categorize the anemone merely as a stationary trap is to fundamentally underestimate its biological complexity. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of its existence is its neurological architecture. The sea anemone orchestrates this lethal ballet, coordinates its tentacles, digests its prey, and defends its territory without possessing a centralized brain. It relies on a decentralized, incredibly diffuse nerve net spread throughout its tissue. This web of neurons is capable of coordinating highly complex, localized responses to environmental stimuli. It allows the anemone to constantly modulate the movement of its tentacles to catch passing plankton, strictly regulate the firing threshold of its nematocysts so they are not wasted on inanimate debris, and acutely respond to minute variations in light, temperature, and water chemistry. This decentralized intelligence enables the animal to flawlessly optimize its feeding efficiency and maintain total physiological balance in a highly dynamic, wildly unpredictable environment. This same neurological flexibility governs the anemone's remarkable capacity for regeneration and survival. When subjected to physical trauma, the anemone can rapidly reconstruct lost tentacles or damaged tissue. In many species, this regenerative power is pushed to the extreme through asexual reproduction. An anemone can literally tear itself in half down the center, slowly pulling its basal disc apart until it splits into two fully formed, genetically identical clones. This capacity for infinite replication ensures a terrifying resilience, allowing anemone populations to blanket the reef and persist through environmental catastrophes that would easily wipe out more complex, fragile organisms. But space on a coral reef is the most valuable currency in the ocean, and the anemone does not acquire its territory peacefully. The narrative of the anemone as a passive flower shatters completely when examining its competitive interactions with neighboring organisms. These creatures engage in brutal, slow-motion chemical warfare to secure and expand their real estate. When a rival anemone or a rapidly growing coral colony encroaches on its territory, the anemone deploys a specialized arsenal completely distinct from its hunting tentacles. It inflates hidden, club-like structures called acrorhagi. These white, bulbous appendages are packed with an entirely different, incredibly potent class of stinging cells designed specifically for tissue destruction rather than paralysis. The anemone stretches these weapons across the divide, striking an encroaching neighbor and leaving behind patches of necrotic, dying tissue. On crowded reefs, one can observe stark, barren battle lines, a no-man's land of dead coral separating competing clones, a silent testament to the territorial dominance asserted by a creature completely devoid of physical mobility. The evolutionary success of the sea anemone is largely driven by its ability to forge profound, world-altering alliances. While its tentacles mean certain death for most of the ocean, they provide the foundation for one of the most iconic mutualistic relationships in the natural world. The clownfish, through a highly delicate and dangerous acclimation process, coats itself in a specialized mucus that effectively hacks the anemone's chemical recognition system. It renders a fish completely invisible to the stinging cells, transforming the lethal snare into a private, heavily fortified sanctuary. But the anemone is not merely offering free rent. The clownfish fiercely defends its host from specialized predators, like the butterfly fish, which possess elongated snouts designed to graze on anemone tissue. The constant, frantic movement of the clownfish deep within the tentacles heavily oxygenates the anemone, while the fish's metabolic waste provide a highly concentrated, localized source of essential nitrogen. This nitrogen is absolutely critical because it fuels the anemone's hidden, internal solar engine. Embedded deep within the translucent tissues of shallow water anemones are millions of microscopic, symbiotic algae known as zooxanthellae. These algae perform continuous photosynthesis, capturing the intense tropical sunlight and converting it into rich organic sugars, which are then passed directly into the anemone cells. In sunlit waters, the anemone functions as a hybrid organism, part carnivorous predator, part solar-powered plant. The vibrant, breathtaking colors of the anemone, the deep purples, neon greens, and brilliant reds, are largely derived from these internal algal farms and the specialized proteins the anemone produces to protect them from ultraviolet radiation. This deep integration of chemical warfare, solar energy production, and multi-species mutualism elevates the sea anemone from a simple predator to a foundational ecosystem engineer. It becomes a microscopic metropolis. Beyond the clownfish, the anemone's protective shadow provides shelter for a highly specialized community of porcelain crabs, transparent cleaner shrimp, and juvenile fish. These inhabitants engage in their own complex negotiations with the host, cleaning its surface of parasites, scavenging its leftover meals, and adding to the intricate web of biodiversity. The anemone ceases to be just an animal. It becomes a living, breathing habitat, physically shaping the community dynamics of the surrounding reef. As we look beyond the sun-drenched shallows, the incredible versatility of the anemone's ancient body plan becomes even more apparent. In the lightless, crushing depths of the abyssal plain, where solar-powered algae cannot survive, deep water anemones grow to monstrous proportions, their tentacles elongating into massive, sweeping nets designed to intercept the sparse, drifting life of the deep ocean. They cling to the sides of boiling hydrothermal vents, bathe in toxic chemicals, and anchor themselves beneath the freezing ice of the polar seas. Across every extreme, the core evolutionary strategy remains flawlessly consistent: the absolute transformation of a passive, unthreatening appearance into active, lethal capability. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the sea anemone is its relationship with time. Driven by its decentralized nervous system and its continuous cellular regeneration, many species of sea anemone exhibit what biologists call negligible senescence. They simply do not show signs of aging. Their cells do not degrade over time. Barring predation, disease, or catastrophic environmental change, a sea anemone has a biological potential to live for decades, centuries, or perhaps indefinitely. An individual anemone anchored to a specific coral head may have witnessed the entire lifespan of the reef around it, an immortal, silent sentinel outliving generations of fish that seek refuge within its arms. In the shifting, chaotic light of the underwater world, the sea anemone continues its silent, eternal vigil. Its tentacles sway with that same deceptive, hypnotic grace, painting a picture of absolute tranquility. Fish dart frantically past, some finding life-saving sanctuary deep within its embrace, while others make a singular, fatal miscalculation and meet a swift, unseen end. The boundary between absolute safety and sudden death exists only at the microscopic moment of physical contact. It is a boundary defined not by outward appearance, but by the invisible, highly pressurized mechanics that lie just beneath the skin. This duality encapsulates the profound essence of the anemone's existence. It is a living, breathing paradox where supreme vulnerability is magically transmuted into impenetrable strength, and absolute stillness becomes the most aggressive strategy of all. As the ocean currents carry the rhythmic pulse of the tides across its delicate, blooming form, the sea anemone stands as an eternal testament to the power of deception, a beautiful, terrifying reminder that in the natural world, the most unassuming, delicate forms often harbor the most formidable and unforgiving truths. A shadow detaches itself from the reef wall, resolving into the sleek, heavily muscled form of a pelagic hunter. It locks its gaze onto a target drifting aimlessly in the open water just above the coral canopy. The predator calculates the trajectory, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline as it initiates a high-speed strike. Jaws part, muscles contract, and the hunter closes the final distance, expecting the soft, yielding impact of an effortless kill. But in the split second before the teeth can connect, the very fabric of the encounter violently unravels. The small, unassuming fish does not attempt a desperate, flailing escape. Instead, it undergoes a transformation so abrupt and so physically impossible that the predator's attack collapses in mid-motion. In the blink of an eye, the streamlined prey rapidly swells into a rigid, spherical mass, expanding to more than 3 times its original volume. What was, a moment ago, a swallowable morsel is now a massive, unyielding globe bristling with razor-sharp spines. Confronted with an object that actively defies the geometry of its own jaws, the predator recoils in profound confusion and abandons the strike, fleeing from the sudden, alien geometry of an intended meal. This is a pufferfish, an organism that survives a relentless, hyper-competitive slaughterhouse of the ocean, not by swimming faster, hiding deeper, or biting harder. It survives by instantaneously rewriting the predator's perception of reality. It survives by utilizing one of the most dramatic, instantaneous defensive reversals in the natural world, proving that in the theater of the reef, the most powerful defense is the ability to instantly weaponize your own anatomy. To comprehend the evolutionary genius of the pufferfish, one must first understand the perilous reality of its baseline existence. Coral reefs are unforgiving arenas where efficiency entirely dictates survival. The most successful inhabitants of this environment rely on rapid acceleration, tight schooling behavior, or complex, disruptive camouflage. The pufferfish, by all conventional biological metrics, appears entirely ill-suited for this world. It is built like a sunken zeppelin. Its body is rounded, rigid, and awkwardly proportioned. It relies on a slow, rowing motion of its small pectoral, dorsal, and anal fins of propulsion, making it a phenomenally clumsy and lethargic swimmer. If a predator decides to give chase, the pufferfish has absolutely zero chance of outrunning it. Yet, This glaring, almost comical vulnerability conceals an extraordinary evolutionary innovation. The puffer fish has gambled its entire existence on a singular, devastating contingency plan: the ability to transform its physical form into a formidable, impenetrable deterrent in a matter of seconds. This strategy ruthlessly exploits a fundamental psychological principle of predator behavior. Oceanic hunters are finely tuned biological calculators. They constantly, subconsciously assess the energetic costs and the physical risks associated with capturing any given prey. By abruptly and catastrophically altering those calculations, the puffer fish turns an imminent, guaranteed predation event into a moment of severe hesitation and ultimate retreat. The biological mechanism that allows for this rapid, explosive inflation is both breathtakingly elegant and highly specialized, requiring a complete dismantling of standard vertebrate anatomy. To become a balloon, the puffer fish had to lose its ribs. Most fish possess a rigid rib cage to protect their internal organs, but ribs would restrict expansion. The puffer has abandoned them, replacing them with an exceptionally elastic stomach that is highly folded upon itself, capable of unfolding and expanding to a staggering degree. Its skin is equally specialized, composed of a dense matrix of collagen fibers that can stretch enormously without tearing, yet immediately lock into a rigid, unyielding sphere once maximum capacity is reached. When the fish perceives an inescapable threat, it does not panic. It executes a highly coordinated muscular sequence. It begins forcefully gulping massive volumes of water or air if it is unfortunate enough to be pulled above the surface, using incredibly powerful buccal and pharyngeal muscles in its throat. It pumps this water directly into its highly expandable stomach. Crucially, this intake is facilitated by a specialized, one-way biological valve located at the base of the esophagus. This valve slams shut after every gulp, preventing the immense internal pressure from forcing the water back out. As the stomach rapidly fills, it expands into the empty space of the peritoneal cavity, pushing the fish's other internal organs flat against its spine and skin. As the internal pressure spikes and the body balloons outward, a secondary defensive mechanism is triggered. Embedded deep within the dermis are hundreds of sharp, modified scales. In the fish's relaxed state, these spines lie perfectly flat against the body, keeping the animal streamlined. But as the skin stretches taut over the expanding stomach, these spines are pulled upright, locking into a vertical, outward-facing position. Within seconds, the clumsy, slow-moving fish has transmuted into a rigid, spiky orb. It is a shape that physically cannot be swallowed by most predators, a floating naval mine that promises only lacerated gills and a choking, suffocating death to anything foolish enough to try. Yet, this spectacular visual and physical transformation is only the first layer of the puffer fish's defensive arsenal. For all its spikes and swelling, a truly desperate or massive predator might still attempt to crush the fish. To ensure that its dramatic display is never called as a bluff, the puffer fish harbors a dark, invisible secret. Hidden within its internal organs, specifically its liver, gonads, and often laced throughout its skin, is one of the most potent and terrifying naturally occurring poisons on Earth: tetrodotoxin. Tetrodotoxin, or TTX, is a neurotoxin of catastrophic lethality. It operates by physically blocking the voltage-gated sodium channels in the nerve and muscle cells of its victims. These channels are the fundamental pathways that allow electrical signals to travel from the brain to the body. By plugging these microscopic pores, tetrodotoxin instantly and irreversibly halts the transmission of all neurological commands. The predator's brain can frantically signal its muscles to move, its gills to pump, its heart to beat, but the signals are met with total, terrifying silence. Even in microscopic quantities, TTX induces rapid, systemic paralysis, respiratory failure, and death. It is a chemical defense so absolute that a single puffer fish contains enough toxin to kill dozens of apex predators. But the most fascinating twist in the story of this chemical warfare is that the puffer fish does not actually possess the genetic code to manufacture its own poison. It outsources its toxicity. The tetrodotoxin is synthesized by highly specific strains of symbiotic bacteria, including Pseudoalteromonas and Vibrio, which are naturally present in the marine environment. As the puffer fish forages, it consumes these bacteria, which then colonize its digestive tract and internal organs. The fish has evolved profound physiological immunity to the toxin, allowing it to safely absorb, concentrate, and store the deadly chemical within its own tissues. This remarkable symbiotic partnership transforms a pufferfish from a merely difficult meal into a biologically radioactive hazard. To prevent predators from making a fatal mistake, a mistake that would result in the death of the pufferfish as well, the fish must clearly communicate its toxicity. In the ocean, stealth is for the vulnerable, but bright colors are the universal language of the untouchable. Many species of pufferfish display striking, high-contrast patterns: neon yellows, deep blacks, brilliant blues, and stark whites. This is known as aposematic coloration. It is a bold, uncompromising, honest advertisement of the fish's lethality. When a young, inexperienced predator attacks a pufferfish, the sudden inflation, the sharp spines, and perhaps a foul, toxic taste immediately abort the encounter. The predator flees, deeply traumatized by the event. From that moment on, the predator's brain permanently associates those vibrant, bold colors and that clumsy swimming style with extreme danger. The pufferfish leverages the psychological conditioning, utilizing the memory and learning capabilities of the entire reef community to ensure its own safe passage. The predator learns to look elsewhere, and the puffer drifts on unbothered. However, the pufferfish's evolutionary strategy is not without its severe constraints. The act of explosive inflation is an incredibly stressful and energetically demanding process. It places immense strain on the animal's cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Once inflated, the fish is essentially immobilized, drifting helplessly at the mercy of the ocean currents. If it remains fully inflated for an extended period, it risks severe exhaustion, impaired buoyancy control, and suffocation as the massive, water-filled stomach presses violently against its gills and internal organs. Inflation is strictly a temporary, emergency measure, an absolute last resort rather than a sustained state of being. The fish must eventually relax its esophageal sphincter, forcefully expel the water, and return to its vulnerable, deflated form to resume breathing and swimming normally. Beyond its spectacular defenses, the pufferfish plays a critical, active role in the ecological balance of the coral reef. While it may look passive, it is a highly specialized predator of benthic invertebrates. Evolution has fused its jawbones and its teeth together, creating a massive, incredibly powerful, beak-like structure that resembles the crushing jaws of a parrot. This heavy-duty biological hardware allows the puffer to exploit a food source that is entirely inaccessible to most other fish on the reef. It hunts for hard-shelled organisms, snails, crabs, sea urchins, and heavily armored bivalves. With a sickening crunch, the pufferfish shatters their protective shells, accessing the rich, protein-dense meat inside. By constantly foraging on these heavily armored populations, the pufferfish acts as a crucial regulator, preventing any one species of invertebrate from overpopulating and devastating the delicate algae and coral structures of the reef. In this way, the pufferfish's offensive capabilities are just as specialized and ecologically vital as its terrifying defensive displays. The evolutionary trajectory that produced this bizarre, spherical wonder of the sea is a testament to the power of incremental adaptation. Millions of years ago, the ancestors of the modern pufferfish likely possessed only a very modest ability to expand their stomachs, providing a slight advantage against predators trying to swallow them. Over countless generations, natural selection ruthlessly favored those individuals capable of drawing in slightly more water, possessing slightly sharper scales, and harboring slightly higher concentrations of toxic bacteria. Today, the integration of these traits, extreme inflation, rigid spination, and lethal toxicity, represent a flawless, synergistic survival system. It highlights a profound principle that survival in the natural world rarely relies on a single isolated trick, but rather on the compounding power of multiple, overlapping evolutionary innovations. The narrative of the pufferfish takes a fascinating, almost paradoxical turn when it intersects with human culture. In parts of East Asia, particularly Japan, the flesh of the pufferfish, known as fugu, is considered a culinary delicacy of the highest order. Because the lethal tetrodotoxin is concentrated in specific organs, preparing the fish requires years of meticulous, rigorous training and government certification. A single slip of the chef's knife can contaminate the edible flesh, turning a high-end meal into a rapid, agonizing death sentence. This intense human fascination with deliberately consuming a known, lethal organism highlights our strange relationship with the natural world, an intoxicating intersection of extreme danger and exquisite allure. Beyond the dining table, the deadly tetrodotoxin itself has become a subject of intense medical research. Because it blocks nerve signals with such absolute precision, scientists are studying it as a potential foundation for revolutionary, non-addictive analgesics to treat severe, chronic pain. Even in the clinical sterility of a laboratory, the pufferfish's biological weaponry commands total respect. As twilight descends upon the tropical reef, the vibrant, sunlit world transitions into a realm of deep, shifting shadows. The pufferfish, currently unthreatened and deflated, resumes its unassuming, slightly comical shape. It paddles slowly along the edge of the coral drop-off, its large, expressive eyes scanning the substrate for the subtle movement of a crab. To a passing shark or a hunting grouper, it looks like a slow, floating target, an easy calorie in an ocean that demands constant feeding. Yet, beneath that calm, sluggish exterior lies the absolute potential for explosive, instantaneous metamorphosis. The enduring image of the pufferfish is one profound paradox. It is a creature that projects an aura of total vulnerability, yet commands the absolute, unbroken respect of the ocean's most apex predators. It embodies a biological principle that survival often hinges entirely on the ability to manipulate expectation. By possessing the power to instantly transform itself from a manageable, bite-sized meal into a hazardous, toxic, and physically impossible object, the pufferfish totally disrupts the seamless, split-second efficiency upon which all predation depends. It does not need to swim fast. It does not need to hide in the dark. It simply drifts in the open water, a quiet, unassuming master of the reef, secure by the terrifying knowledge that it can, at any moment, rewrite the very rules of the hunt. A massive, heavy-bodied grouper prowls the lower ledges of the coral reef, its large eyes scanning the uneven terrain for the slightest hint of vulnerability. It spots a small, exposed crab resting carelessly on a mottled patch of stone. It is an easy target, a guaranteed meal. The grouper accelerates, opening its cavernous mouth to draw on the prey. But in the exact fraction of a second before impact, the reality of the scene violently fractures. The crab does not scuttle away. Instead, it simply dissolves. Its legs melt seamlessly into the seafloor. The colors bleed out of its shell, and the shape flattens into the stone. The grouper crashes heavily into empty water, its jaws snapping shut on nothing but the current. The crab was never there. It was a phantom, an optical illusion woven from living flesh. The creature responsible for this staggering deception is the octopus. It is an animal that does not merely hide within the ocean. It actively rewrites its own identity, surviving by ensuring that nothing around it can ever be completely certain of what it is seeing. To exist as an octopus in the hyper-predatory environment of the world's oceans is to live in a state of extreme, perpetual vulnerability. The octopus occupies a highly precarious position in the marine food web. It lacks the heavy, calcified armor of a crustacean. It lacks the explosive, sustained swimming speed of pelagic fish. It does not gather in massive protective schools, and it possesses no venomous spines to deter an attack. Its body is entirely soft, a dense, exposed package of high-value protein that every predator on the reef, from sharks to moray eels to dolphins, would eagerly consume. Yet, despite this glaring lack of conventional physical defenses, the octopus is a dominant, thriving presence across almost every marine habitat on Earth. Evolution has equipped it not with brute strength or impenetrable shields, but with the capacity for rapid, multidimensional deception. It survives by fundamentally breaking the link between perception and reality. The foundation of this unparalleled mastery lies in extraordinary, almost alien architecture of the octopus's skin. It is not merely a boundary between the animal and the water. It is a high-resolution, biological display screen wired directly into the creature's central nervous system. Embedded within the upper layers of the dermis are millions of highly specialized pigment cells known as chromatophores. Unlike the pigment cells in human skin, which change color slowly over days of sun exposure, the chromatophores of an octopus are dynamic, mechanical structures. Each microscopic sac of red, brown, or yellow pigment is tethered to a microscopic ring of radial muscles. When the octopus's brain issues an electrical command, these muscles violently contract, pulling the sac open and exposing a brilliant splash of color. When the command ceases, the muscles relax and the color instantly vanishes. But a flat splash of color is not enough to fool the sophisticated eyes of a hunting shark. Deeper within the skin lies a second layer of optical manipulation, the iridophores. These specialized cells do not contain pigment at all. Instead, they contain stacks of microscopic crystalline plates that act as biological reflectors. As ambient light passes through the skin, these plates catch the rays and bounce them back, creating shimmering, iridescent blues, greens, and silvers. Beneath the iridophores lies a third layer, the leucophores, which act as a base coat of pure, highly reflective white, scattering available light to perfectly match the brightness of the surrounding water. Working in absolute instantaneous harmony, this multi-tiered system allows the octopus to replicate not just the color, but the exact optical behavior of the environment around it. Yet, the ocean is not a flat painting. It is a deeply textured, three-dimensional world of jagged coral, pitted rock, and swaying algae. To truly disappear, the octopus must transcend color and manipulate physical space. It achieves this through specialized networks of muscular hydrostats embedded in its skin called papillae. By precisely contracting these muscles, the octopus can force the smooth hydrodynamic surface of its body to abruptly rise and buckle into a jagged, three-dimensional topography. In seconds, a creature that was perfectly smooth can sprout fleshy spikes, elaborate webbing, and coarse bumps. When resting on a coral head, it raises these papillae to flawlessly mimic the sharp, irregular surface of the stone. When moving through a bed of kelp, it elongates them into drifting, leaf-like protrusions. The octopus does not simply match its environment. It physically becomes an extension of it. The true, terrifying brilliance of this deception, however, does not lie in the skin itself, but in the mind that commands it. The octopus possesses one of the most complex, highly evolved nervous systems of any invertebrate on the planet. But its intelligence is not confined to a single, centralized brain housed within a skull. The octopus's cognition is profoundly decentralized. More than half of its neurons are distributed throughout its 8 arms. This means the arms possess a shocking degree of autonomy. They can taste, touch, explore, and react to their environment independently, without needing direct instruction from the central brain. This distributed intelligence allows the octopus to process a staggering amount of sensory data simultaneously, assessing threats and executing multi-step, highly coordinated defensive strategies with cold, calculated precision. This cognitive flexibility is the core of the octopus's survival. In an ecosystem where predators quickly learn to associate specific shapes and colors with food, consistency is a death sentence. If an animal always relies on the exact same disguise, a predator will eventually break the code. The octopus circumvents this by maintaining a state of perpetual ambiguity. It is the master of unpredictability. It may adopt the texture and color of a sponge to avoid the initial gaze of a passing eel. If the eel draws closer, the octopus might instantly transition its skin into a chaotic, strobing pattern of high-contrast black and white to startle the predator. Every encounter is uniquely calculated. The octopus never repeats the same illusion in exactly the same way. When camouflage fails and the predator finally lunges, the octopus deploys a secondary, deeply chaotic defense mechanism. From a specialized sac within its mantle, it forcefully ejects a dense, billowing cloud of ink. This is not simply a biological smokescreen meant to obscure vision. The ink of an octopus is heavily laden with melanin and serves as a complex, multi-sensory weapon. In many instances, the octopus mixes this ink with mucus to create a cohesive, physical mass in the water column known as a pseudomorph. This dark, floating decoy is roughly the same size and shape as the octopus itself. As the predator attacks the phantom shape, the real octopus, now having instantly turned completely pale to erase its visual signature, uses its powerful siphon to jet away. Furthermore, the chemical composition of the ink aggressively attacks the predator's chemosensory systems, effectively blinding the attacker's sense of smell and taste, plunging it into a state of total sensory confusion while the prey vanishes. The anatomy that allows for this rapid escape is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. Because the octopus lacks a skeleton entirely, it is not bound by the physical constraints of joints and bones. The only hard structure in its entire body is a sharp, parrot-like beak hidden at the center of its arms. This means that an octopus can flow like a liquid. It can compress its entire mass, squeezing an incredibly large body through an opening scarcely larger than its own eye. This terrifying flexibility allows it to exploit microscopic crevices, narrow fissures, and discarded shells that are entirely inaccessible to its predators. Once wedged deep inside the solid rock of the reef, the octopus becomes untouchable. But the octopus is not merely a master of evasion. It is a highly lethal, apex-level predator in its own right. It utilizes the exact same mastery of deception to inflict violence upon the reef. It stalks its prey with agonizing patience, inching across the seabed while maintaining perfect, real-time visual integration with the stones and sand beneath it. It moves closer and closer, an invisible shadow creeping over the reef. At the decisive moment, the octopus launches a rapid, enveloping strike. It flings its webbed arms forward like a biological parachute, dropping a dark canopy over a crab or a slow-moving fish. The hundreds of independent, highly sensitive suckers line the arms, tasting the prey upon contact and locking onto the struggling victim with immense physical force. The prey is drawn inexorably toward the beak, where the octopus delivers a paralyzing, venomous bite. Specialized salivary glands pump powerful neurotoxins into the wound, instantly shutting down the victim's nervous system and beginning the process of breaking down its tissue. Perhaps the most haunting mystery of the octopus's existence lies in the way it perceives the world it so perfectly imitates. Despite its ability to execute flawless, high-definition color matching, scientific evidence strongly suggests that the octopus is entirely colorblind. Its eyes contain only one type of photoreceptor, meaning it sees the ocean in a spectrum of grayscale. How, then, does a colorblind animal perfectly match the vibrant reds, yellows, and browns of the reef? The answer lies in a sensory world we can barely comprehend. The octopus's eyes are highly sensitive to the polarization of light, the specific angles at which light waves travel through the water. It detects contrasts, brightness, and patterns with a level of acuity that allows it to replicate the exact optical signature of its background without ever actually seeing the color. This profound biological paradox perfectly encapsulates the alien nature of the octopus. It is a creature that manipulates reality using rules that completely defy human understanding. This brilliant, highly sophisticated life is ultimately governed by a tragic and unyielding biological clock. The reproductive strategy of the octopus is a story of absolute, devastating sacrifice. They are sommelporous organisms, meaning they reproduce only once in their entire lives. When a female octopus mates and lays her thousands of teardrop-shaped eggs, she retreats into a deep, hidden den. From that moment on, her entire existence is dedicated solely to the next generation. She meticulously guards the strings of eggs, gently blowing streams of water over them to keep them oxygenated and free of fungal infections. For months, she never leaves the den. She does not hunt. She does not eat. This extreme parental devotion is driven by a fatal hormonal shift triggered within her optic gland. As the embryos develop, the mother's body begins to systematically shut down. She metabolizes her own muscles to stay alive, slowly wasting away in the darkness. By the time the eggs finally hatch, releasing thousands of microscopic, perfectly formed octopuses into the water column, the mother is at the absolute end of her physical limits. Having successfully passed her genes into the future, she dies. It is an evolutionary trade-off of profound poignancy, the ultimate sacrifice of the individual to ensure the continuation of the species. A creature of almost limitless intelligence and adaptability, given a lifespan of only a few short years. As twilight descends over the reef and the sharp sunlight gives way to the deep, ambiguous blues of the evening, the octopus resumes its silent, fluid patrol. It moves across the seabed, its identity shifting continuously. A patch of pale sand becomes a dark, textured rock. A smooth stone suddenly erupts into a crown of jagged, fleshy thorns. A fleeting, formless shadow disappears into a crack in the coral. Every transformation is a rejection of certainty. In a world governed by the relentless, brutal efficiency of teeth and speed, the octopus endures by continuously rewriting the rules of perception. The enduring image of the octopus is one of perpetual, mesmerizing ambiguity. It is a creature that cannot be easily defined, whose very essence lies in its absolute capacity for physical and psychological change. by dissolving the strict boundaries between organism and environment, between predator and prey, between visibility and invisibility. The octopus exemplifies the evolutionary power of deception in its purest, most perfect form. It is not merely an inhabitant of the ocean. It is a master editor of its own reality, surviving through an extraordinary alien synthesis of decentralized intelligence and biological innovation. In the silent, unforgiving theater of the underwater world, the octopus stands as a living testament to profound effectiveness of remaining entirely unknowable. A heavily armored sea snail inches its way across the vibrant, sun-drenched floor of a tropical coral reef. It moves with the slow, deliberate confidence of a creature that believes it is entirely impenetrable. Its heavy, spiraled shell, forged from thick calcium carbonate, has successfully deflected the crushing jaws of Moray eels, the sharp, parrot-like beaks of pufferfish, and the relentless, prying claws of desperate crabs. To the snail, this calcium fortress represents absolute biological security. It grazes peacefully on a patch of algae, completely unaware that it has just crossed an invisible, lethal threshold. From the dark, narrow opening of a nearby burrow carved directly into the seabed, a pair of highly complex, independently rotating eyes mounted on stalks tracks the snail's microscopic movements with unnerving, mechanical precision. There is no warning. There is no visible preparation, no flaring of fins, no sudden lunging of a shadowy predator. There is only a sudden, violent flash of movement. In less than a fraction of a blink of a human eye, a catastrophic shockwave ripples through the water column, and the seemingly invulnerable shell of the snail violently shatters into dozens of jagged fragments, as if it had been struck by a high-velocity steel hammer. The predator responsible for this devastating display of physical trauma is scarcely larger than a human finger. It is draped in vibrant, almost comical shades of neon green, electric blue, and brilliant red, making it look more like a painted, ornamental toy than a killer. This is a mantis shrimp, an organism that survives and dominates the reef by concealing an unfathomable, world-shattering lethality within a body so small and intensely colorful that it is routinely underestimated by everything that encounters it. It is a creature that transforms the basic assumptions of physical scale into a decisive, deadly survival advantage. Amid the bustling, chaotic complexity of coral reef ecosystems, where countless thousands of species constantly compete for space, food, and security, the mantis shrimp occupies a niche defined by two contrasting extremes: total secrecy and explosive, catastrophic power. It spends a vast majority of its life hidden deep within complex burrows excavated in the sand or naturally occurring crevices in the hard coral rock. From this concealed vantage point, it presents absolutely no immediate threat to the animals passing by. Its vibrant coloration and compact, slender size lead predators and prey alike to drastically misjudge its capabilities. They assume that something so small and beautiful must be fragile. This profound misinterpretation is a central pillar of the mantis shrimp's evolutionary success. By remaining perfectly inconspicuous until the absolute, precise moment of action, it weaponizes the element of surprise, ensuring that its true, terrifying nature is revealed only when the prey is already dead. The biological foundation of this remarkable, unparalleled predatory strategy lies in a highly specialized biomechanical marvel of anatomy known as a raptorial appendage. Evolution has divided the mantis shrimp lineage into two primary functional groups, the spearers and the smashers. The spearers possess elongated, barbed limbs designed to instantly impale soft-bodied prey like passing fish, snatching them from the water column like a trap snapping shut. But it is the smashers that command the most awe, for their raptorial limbs are engineered to function as biological hammers of unprecedented, devastating force. The mechanics of this smasher appendage are a masterpiece of biological physics. The mantis shrimp cannot rely on simple muscle contraction to achieve the speeds necessary to break armor. Muscles alone are simply too slow and too weak. Instead, the appendage functions on a highly specialized latch-in spring mechanism. A saddle-shaped, incredibly elastic structure within the limb stores immense mechanical energy as the shrimp contract its muscles, slowly loading a biological spring over the course of several seconds. The appendage is locked into place by a specialized latch. When the mantis shrimp releases this latch, all of that pent-up, stored elastic energy is unleashed in a single explosive instant. The club propels forward with mind-boggling, terrifying acceleration. It reaches speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour underwater, accelerating faster than a .22 caliber bullet, leaving the barrel of a gun. The sheer force of this impact is more than enough to instantly crack the thickest crab carapaces, shatter clam shells, and obliterate the defenses of heavily armored snails. But the physical impact of the biological hammer is only the first half of the mantis shrimp's devastating assault. Because the limb moves through the water at such an extreme, physically impossible velocity, it literally tears the surrounding water molecules apart. This hyperacceleration creates a region of intense negative pressure immediately behind the striking club, causing the water to spontaneously boil at room temperature. This phenomenon generates tiny, localized vacuums known as cavitation bubbles. These bubbles exist for only a fraction of a millisecond. When the surrounding water pressure inevitably crashes back down to instantly collapse these vacuums, the implosion generates a secondary catastrophic shock wave. The collapse of a cavitation bubble is a thermodynamic event of extreme violence. For a brief, microscopic instant, the temperature inside the collapsing bubble reaches thousands of degrees Celsius, approaching the surface temperature of the sun, and emits a brief, tiny flash of light, a phenomenon known as sonoluminescence. This means that when a mantis shrimp strikes, it attacks its prey twice simultaneously. If the physical club somehow misses its target, the ensuing cavitation shockwave alone carries enough concussive force to stun, dismember, or instantly kill the prey. The dual mechanism of impact and implosion ensures that absolutely no heavily armored prey on the reef can withstand the assault. The mantis shrimp does not just break shells. It subjects its prey to a localized, microscopic explosive detonation. To execute a strike of this magnitude without destroying its own body requires yet another layer of biological armor. The club of the smashing mantis shrimp is coated in a highly specialized arrangement of hydroxyapatite, the same mineral found in human bone, but structured in a unique, twisting, spiraling pattern known as a Bulligan structure. This internal architecture acts as an incredibly advanced shock absorber, preventing microscopic cracks from spreading to the limb upon impact. It allows the mantis shrimp to deliver tens of thousands of these explosive, high-velocity strikes over its lifetime, without its own weapon shattering from the sheer, repeated trauma. However, the possession of the most powerful physical weapon in the animal kingdom is useless if the predator cannot effectively target its prey. To complement its formidable offensive capabilities, the mantis shrimp has evolved what is widely considered to be the most sophisticated and complex visual system ever discovered in the natural world. Human beings navigate the visual world using 3 types of color-receptive cones in our eyes: red, green, and blue. Every color we have ever seen, from a sunset to a painting, is a combination of these 3 receptors. The compound eyes of the mantis shrimp possess up to 16 distinct types of photoreceptor cells. Their vision operates on a level of complexity that is fundamentally impossible for the human brain to comprehend. Each of their 2 eyes is mounted on a highly mobile stalk, capable of rotating entirely independently, granting the animal a near-panoramic, 3-dimensional view of the chaotic reef. Furthermore, a single mantis shrimp eye is divided into 3 distinct specialized regions, meaning that each individual eye possesses true trinocular vision and depth perception. While a human requires 2 eyes to accurately judge distance, the mantis shrimp can perfectly calculate the range, speed, and trajectory of a target using just 1. Beyond their staggering array of color receptors, these eyes are capable of perceiving wavelengths of light that are completely invisible to almost all other life forms. They can see deep into the ultraviolet spectrum, and they are the only animals on Earth definitively known to detect circularly polarized light. This profound, almost alien sensory apparatus is not a biological luxury. It is a vital necessity for survival in the sensory overload of the coral reef. The mantis shrimp's unbelievable vision allows it to cut through the visual noise, the glare of the sun, and the shimmering water column to detect the translucent bodies of hidden prey. It allows them to perceive the subtle, hidden structural weaknesses in a crab's shell before they even launch their strike. And crucially, this visual system facilitates incredibly complex, secret communication between individuals. Mantis shrimp bodies reflect polarized light in specific patterns, acting as invisible optical signaling boards. They can broadcast warnings to rivals or signal availability to potential mates using wavelengths of light that their predators, such as sharks and groupers, literally cannot see. They are communicating on a private, highly encrypted biological frequency. The integration of this supreme visual acuity with unparalleled mechanical power creates a predator that is uniquely and flawlessly adapted to dominate the benthic environment of the reef. While many large predators rely purely on stealth or sustained speed, the mantis shrimp combines sensory omniscience with overwhelming localized force. This synergy is particularly critical when dealing with their own kind. Because mantis shrimp are highly territorial and fiercely protective of their burrows, encounters between rival individuals are fraught with the potential for sudden, mutual destruction. If two heavily armed smashers were to simply attack one another with full force, both would likely die. To prevent their own weapons from wiping out their species, mantis shrimp engage in highly ritualized, heavily choreographed territorial disputes. Rather than aiming for the head or the soft underbelly, they employ their raptorial limbs in controlled, measured strikes. The defending mantis shrimp will coil its body and present its heavily armored telson, a thick, shield-like plate at the end of its tail, to absorb the blow. The combatants take turns striking each other's shields, essentially engaging in a biological, high-stakes game of physical endurance. The smaller or weaker individual will eventually concede and retreat, resolving the conflict without escalating into lethal, catastrophic violence. This ritualized warfare illustrates a highly sophisticated balance between extreme aggression and necessary energy conservation, ensuring that their immense power is reserved primarily for hunting and defense against larger predators. These intense social dynamics reveal a surprisingly complex life history. Despite their reputation as solitary, violent ambush predators, many species of mantis shrimp exhibit profound social organization. In several species, males and females form monogamous, lifelong pair bonds. They will cohabitate, sharing and aggressively defending a single, massive burrow system for decades. This cooperative arrangement significantly enhances their reproductive success by ensuring the constant protection of their eggs and the highly efficient utilization of local food resources. The female will carefully lay a massive gelatinous mass of fertilized eggs and hold them delicately against her chest, constantly cleaning and aerating them, while the male patrols the perimeter of the burrow, using his devastating clubs to ward off any approaching threat. The juxtaposition of their violent, explosive hunting methods with this tender, cooperative parental care highlights the incredible evolutionary depth of the species. The ecological impact of the mantis shrimp extends far beyond the perimeter of their hidden burrows. As apex predators of the microreef, they exert a massive top-down influence on the population dynamics of hard-shelled invertebrates. By constantly hunting crabs, snails, and urchins, they prevent these grazers from overpopulating and decimating the delicate, structural architecture of the coral. Furthermore, their continuous, lifelong burrowing activities play a crucial role in the physical turnover of the sandy substrate, aerating the sediment and creating complex microenvironments that are eventually utilized by countless other reef organisms. In this way, the mantis shrimp functions not just as a specialized killer, but as an essential ecosystem engineer, literally reshaping the physical and biological landscape of the ocean floor. The narrative of the mantis shrimp takes a fascinating, almost cautionary turn when considering its interactions with human beings. For decades, unsuspecting fishermen and divers who attempted to handle these brightly colored creatures quickly learned the terrifying reality of their power, earning the mantis shrimp the colloquial nickname thumb splitters. In the marine aquarium trade, the introduction of a small mantis shrimp hiding within a piece of live rock can spell absolute disaster for an enthusiast tank. Under the cover of darkness, the unseen predator will systematically hunt and obliterate every other fish and crustacean in the tank. Moreover, larger specimens of smasher mantis shrimp are entirely capable of striking the thick, reinforced glass in the aquarium with enough force to completely shatter the tank, turning the glass enclosure into a flooded ruin in a fraction of a second. Yet, this exact same destructive power has captivated the attention of modern science and engineering. Researchers studying the incredible, shock-absorbing Bulligan structure of the mantis shrimp's club are currently using its microscopic architecture as a direct blueprint to develop the next generation of ultra-lightweight, impact-resistant materials. The biological armor of this tiny, violent crustacean is actively inspiring the creation of stronger combat helmets for military, safer automotive frames, and advanced aerospace components. The mantis shrimp perfectly illustrates how millions of years of evolutionary pressure can solve complex engineering problems that human technology is only just beginning to comprehend. As the intense tropical daylight slowly fades, filtering to the darkening water column, the reef settles into dangerous, shifting patterns of the night. At the perfectly rounded entrance of a dark burrow, the mantis shrimp remains perfectly poised, a silent, unmoving sentinel of concealed, apocalyptic power. Its stalked eyes rotate independently, methodically scanning the darkening water for the microscopic, polarized signatures of approaching movement, while its heavily armored raptorial limbs remain cocked, loaded, and held in absolute readiness. To the untrained, passing observer, it is merely a small, bizarrely colorful inhabitant of the coral rubble. Yet beneath this brilliantly painted, unassuming exterior lies an absolute convergence of profound sensory omniscience and devastating mechanical force that challenges every conventional biological assumption about size, capability, and strength. The enduring image of the mantis shrimp is one of sudden, explosive revelation. It is the story of a tranquil, silent reef scene utterly shattered by an instantaneous, thermodynamic burst of energy, leaving behind only the fractured, pulverized remnants of what once seemed entirely secure. The mantis shrimp embodies a profound, humbling evolutionary truth that absolute survival in the ocean does not always depend on massive physical dominance, imposing stature, or the safety of the school. It depends on capacity to utterly defy expectations through extreme, highly localized specialization. By perfectly masking extraordinary, physics-defying lethality within a modest, colorful frame, the mantis shrimp transforms the world's underestimation into its greatest tactical opportunity. It ensures its enduring place as one of the ocean's most impelling, terrifying examples of nature's ability to compress immense, catastrophic power into the absolute smallest of forms. In this hidden mathematical calculus of perception, physics, and reality, the mantis shrimp stands as a living, breathing testament to the principle that in the ruthless, unforgiving natural world, size is often the absolute least reliable indicator of true capability. A careless step onto what appears to be an entirely ordinary patch of the tropical reef can trigger one of the most excruciating, biologically devastating defensive reactions in the natural world. The surface of the seabed seems perfectly harmless. To the eye, it is just an uneven cluster of algae-covered rock, deeply mottled with sand, broken shells, and calcified coral fragments. It is a kind of inert, unremarkable geological feature that reef inhabitants and human divers alike ignore entirely, but in an instant, that illusion violently shatters. Beneath that deceptive, suffocating stillness lies the stonefish. It is an organism so perfectly disguised, so utterly committed to its masquerade, that danger exists not as a visible, approaching threat, but as an unseen, terrifying certainty. Unlike predators that rely on relentless pursuit, overwhelming numbers, or physical intimidation, the stonefish survives by ensuring that recognition always comes too late. In its world, the greatest weapon is not speed or aggression, but the catastrophic, agonizing consequence of a simple, fatal mistake. Across the warm, shallow coastal waters of the Indo-Pacific, coral reefs form intricate, highly competitive landscapes of staggering color and structural complexity. These environments are defined by constant, frantic motion. Schools of small fish dart continuously between branching corals. Strong tidal currents sweep dense clouds of plankton across the seabed, and shifting, dappled light creates an ever-changing, chaotic mosaic of shadows. Amid this overwhelming visual noise, the stonefish occupies a highly specialized evolutionary niche that depends entirely on absolute, unrelenting stillness rather than activity. Settled heavily among the rubble, the sand, and the encrusted coral bases, it becomes functionally indistinguishable from the geological features that surround it. It achieves this not merely by hiding, but by fundamentally erasing its own biological identity. Its body is a masterpiece of irregular, asymmetrical ruin. It is lumpy, distorted, and coated with a heavily textured, porous skin that physically supports the growth of actual algae, hydroids, and microscopic marine sediment. It does not just look like a rock. It allows the ocean to literally encrust it, effectively transforming living, breathing tissue into what appears to be a heavy, inert stone. Even at extremely close range, the subtle, sunken positioning of its eyes and the heavily fragmented, formless outline of its body prevent any easy neurological identification. This extraordinary camouflage represents a strategy far more advanced than simple background matching. It is the ultimate expression of cognitive masquerade. While many reef animals attempt to blend into their surroundings by adopting similar colors or geometric patterns, the stonefish actively destabilizes the very concept of biological form. Its appearance aggressively lacks the symmetry, the smooth scales, and the recognizable hydrodynamic features typically associated with living vertebrates. When the brain of a passing predator or an unwary prey item scans the seafloor, it uses cognitive shortcuts to categorize objects as either food, threat, or scenery. The stonefish flawlessly hijacks the psychological filtering system, forcing the observer's brain to instantly categorize it as part of the lifeless environment. This deep manipulation of visual perception is central to its survival, enabling the heavy, sluggish animal to occupy entirely exposed, open positions on the reef floor without ever attracting a single glance of suspicion. Yet, flawless camouflage alone does not fully explain the stonefish's terrifying dominion over the seabed. Beneath its deceptive, rocky exterior lies a highly sophisticated, purely mechanical defensive system that transforms accidental encounters into an unparalleled display of biological deterrence. Arranged along the ridge of its dorsal surface, completely hidden beneath the fleshy, algae-covered skin, are 13 robust, needle-sharp spines. These are not ordinary fins. Each individual spine functions as a heavy-duty, biological hypodermic needle, and each one is connected at its base to a pair of massive, highly pressurized venom glands. The true evolutionary genius of this weapon system is that it is entirely passive. The stonefish does not actively rear up to strike a threat. It does not need to aim, and it does not need to expend any muscular energy to defend itself. It simply waits for the predator or the careless foot of a waiting animal to apply downward pressure. When a heavy object presses against the dorsal ridge, the fleshy sheath covering the spines is pushed downward. This mechanical action physically squeezes the venom glands at the base, forcing the highly toxic fluid up to the hollow core of the spine and directly deep into the tissue of the intruder. This design ensures that the physical cost of misidentification is instantaneous, proportionate to the force applied, and incredibly severe. It constantly reinforces the effectiveness of its camouflage by permanently associating the seabed with the potential for sudden, life-threatening trauma. The venom injected by the stonefish is a deeply complex, highly unstable biochemical cocktail composed of heavy proteins that aggressively attack the victim's biology on multiple fronts. It contains potent cytotoxins that immediately begin to disrupt cellular integrity, breaking down tissue and causing rapid, localized necrosis. More terrifyingly, it contains powerful neurotoxins that aggressively interfere with nerve transmission, inducing a level of physical agony that is widely considered to be among the most intense pain a human being can endure. In small fish and common marine predators, envenomation leads to rapid, systemic immobilization, cardiovascular collapse, and death. In larger animals, the overwhelming physiological distress, massive swelling, and excruciating pain immediately completely short-circuit any predatory intent, sending the attacker fleeing in absolute agony. From a purely evolutionary perspective, this passive system represents a highly efficient, incredibly dark investment in biological defense. Rather than expending vital calories on a frantic escape or engaging in a physically exhausting, high-risk confrontation, the stonefish simply allows the gravity of its environment and the terrifying potency of its venom to perform all the heavy lifting. The result is a survival strategy in which absolute stillness becomes entirely synonymous with absolute security. Paradoxically, the exact same anatomical adaptations that make the stonefish a formidable, untouchable defensive fortress also enhance its effectiveness as a ruthlessly efficient ambush predator. Remaining entirely motionless on the seabed for days or even weeks at a time, it waits with cold, calculating patience for unsuspecting prey to approach within an invisible, microscopic striking distance. The stonefish does not hunt. It simply allows its meals to wander into its execution zone. When a small fish, a passing crab, or a highly agile shrimp ventures too close, grazing carelessly on the algae mere inches from the stonefish's face, the predator executes a rapid, concussive suction feeding event. Without warning, the stonefish suddenly and violently expands its massive, cavernous buccal cavity. The floor of its mouth drops, and its heavy jaws flare outward. This instantaneous internal expansion generates a massive, localized negative pressure gradient, a sudden vacuum in the water column that forcefully draws the surrounding water and the unsuspecting prey directly into its gaping mouth. This feeding mechanism is executed in a fraction of a millisecond. It is among the fastest feeding strikes recorded in the entire teleost order of fishes, enabling the heavy, sluggish stonefish to capture highly agile, fast-moving prey without ever compromising the integrity of its camouflage. The dual, seamless functionality of its adaptations, serving simultaneously as an impenetrable defense and a devastating offense, illustrates the profound elegance of evolutionary design, where a single masterful disguise fulfills multiple, highly critical ecological roles. To perfectly execute an ambush of this magnitude without ever moving its head requires an incredibly sophisticated sensory apparatus. Despite its inert, dead appearance, the stonefish possesses a highly developed, incredibly sensitive lateral line system. This network of microscopic mechanoreceptors runs along the sides of its body, allowing the fish to physically feel the microscopic vibrations and pressure waves in the surrounding water. As a small fish beats its tail, it sends rhythmic ripples through the water column. The stonefish can detect these subtle movements, calculating the size, speed, and exact trajectory of the approaching prey without ever needing to rely on visual confirmation. Furthermore, its anatomy is perfectly engineered for the benthic, bottom-dwelling lifestyle. Its mouth points distinctly upward, and its highly camouflaged eyes are positioned near the very top of its head, granting a clear, unobstructed field of awareness into the water column above. This integration of invisible sensory perception with a flawless physical disguise ensures that the stonefish remains both perfectly hidden and highly responsive, a living, breathing landmine constantly monitoring the microscopic pressure changes of its environment. The life history of the stonefish introduces a brief, incredibly vulnerable contrast to its heavily armored adult existence. During the breeding periods, male and female stonefish must abandon their solitary vigilance, rising slightly from the seabed to engage in external fertilization. The females release massive, highly buoyant masses of unfertilized eggs into the water column, which are immediately fertilized by the males. These eggs drift away on pelagic currents, entirely at the mercy of the open ocean. The resulting larvae are tiny, transparent, and completely lack the venomous spines or the heavy camouflage of their parents. They exist as microscopic plankton, drifting across vast geographic expanses before eventually settling back down onto a distant reef floor. This pelagic dispersal strategy is critical, heavily enhancing the genetic diversity of the species and facilitating the colonization of new, remote habitats, contributing to the overall, long-term resilience of stonefish populations across the Indo-Pacific. As these vulnerable juveniles mature, they slowly begin their remarkable biological transition, gradually developing the heavy dermal features, the lethal spines, and the complex mottled pigmentation that will define the rest of their lives, slowly morphing from transparent, drifting prey into the ultimate, untouchable masters of deception. The ecological role of the stonefish extends far beyond its immediate interactions with its victims. As a dominant ambush predator, it constantly, silently influences behavior, the grazing patterns, and the distribution of smaller reef organisms. It contributes heavily to the complex, deeply intertwined trophic dynamics that sustain the entire coral reef ecosystem. Its mere, invisible presence introduces a permanent, underlying element of profound risk that actively shapes the movement patterns of countless prey species. Because any rock could theoretically be a stonefish, the grazers of the reef must alter where they feed and how they travel, indirectly affecting the grazing pressure on local algae populations and the overall structural health of the coral communities. In this invisible, psychological manner, the stonefish participates deeply in the delicate, highly complex balance of reef ecology, demonstrating vividly that even the most inconspicuous, seemingly inert species can exert massive, unseen influence over their entire environment. Yet, despite its terrifying, heavily fortified defenses, the stonefish is not entirely invulnerable. It exists within an evolutionary arms race, and certain highly specialized predators have developed the biological countermeasures necessary to defeat it. Large bottom-feeding sharks, such as tiger sharks and certain species of rays, appear to possess a significant degree of physiological resistance to the stonefish's venom. Armed with massive crushing jaws, these predators are capable of excavating the stonefish from the sand and consuming them entirely, proving that even the most perfect defense has its eventual limitations. However, the greatest existential threat to the stonefish does not come from biological predators, but from the rapid, catastrophic degradation of its environment. The stonefish's entire evolutionary strategy is fundamentally dependent on the structural complexity and visual chaos of a healthy coral reef. It requires the colorful algae, the vibrant sponges, and the broken, textured coral rubble to provide the necessary backdrop for its masquerade. As global climate change, ocean acidification, and severe pollution trigger massive coral bleaching events, the vibrant, chaotic reefs are reduced to flat, bone-white, barren wastelands. In a dead, bleached environment, a fish that perfectly resembles an algae-covered rock suddenly stands out in stark, highly visible contrast. The loss of its complex habitat violently strips the stonefish of its primary defense, exposing it to predation and completely destroying its ability to successfully ambush prey. The temperate waters off the southern coast of Australia harbor an ecosystem governed by constant, rhythmic chaos. Here, the ocean does not offer the crystal-clear visibility of a tropical lagoon. Instead, it is a world of endless, swaying motion, dominated by vast, underwater meadows of seagrass and towering, submerged forests of kelp. Sunlight filters through this dense canopy in shifting, fractured ribbons, casting a deeply complex, ever-changing matrix of light and shadow across the seafloor. In this dynamic environment, the physical boundaries of objects are constantly dissolving and reforming. Leaves tear and drift in the strong tidal surge, tangling together into formless masses of olive green and golden brown. It is a visually overwhelming landscape. A passing predator scanning these waters is forced to process millions of bits of visual data every second. To cope with this sensory overload, the predator's brain relies on strict cognitive filters, searching specifically for the geometric outlines, the contrasting colors, and the distinct, directional movements of a living fish. Anything that does not fit that exact profile is immediately discarded as irrelevant background noise. A torn, decaying fragment of kelp drifts lazily through this chaotic water column. It tumbles gently in the surge, an entirely lifeless, unremarkable piece of oceanic debris. It catches on a current, spinning slowly, utterly devoid of purpose or direction. But then an impossibility occurs. The fragment of seaweed suddenly blinks. Buried deep within the tangled mass of olive fronds, a tiny, independently rotating eye swivels with cold, mechanical precision, tracking a microscopic shrimp in the water above. In that single, fleeting instant, the brilliant illusion shatters, exposing one of the most astonishing evolutionary masterpieces on the planet. This is not a piece of drifting vegetation. It is the Leafy sea dragon. It is an organism that survives the relentless, hyper-competitive slaughter of the ocean not by developing venom, not by growing heavy armor, and certainly not by outswimming its enemies. It survives by staging a total, absolute rebellion against its own biological identity. It endures by dissolving into pure visual ambiguity, becoming so intricately and flawlessly entangled with the aesthetic of its surroundings that it completely escapes the burden of recognition. To understand the Leafy sea dragon is to understand profound biological concept of masquerade. This is a strategy that goes several steps beyond simple camouflage. When an animal uses camouflage, like a flounder matching the color of the sand, it is attempting to hide itself against the background. Masquerade is fundamentally different. It is an active, psychological manipulation of the predator's mind. The sea dragon does not just try to blend into the kelp. It structurally and behaviorally imitates the kelp itself. It wears the disguise of an inanimate, uninteresting object that a predator has been neurologically conditioned to ignore. By resembling something entirely devoid of nutritional value, the sea dragon hacks the cognitive processing of every hunter on the reef, guiding their brains to the false conclusion that there is absolutely nothing of interest to look at. The anatomy required to pull off this breathtaking deception is completely unparalleled in the vertebrate kingdom. The sea dragon is a member of the Cygnathidae family, a bizarre lineage of fish that includes the seahorses and pipefish. But while a seahorse merely relies on an upright posture and some color shifting, the leafy sea dragon has taken a concept to its absolute chaotic extreme. Its entire body, from its elongated snout to its trunk and all the way down its spine to the tip of its tail, is adorned with elaborate, flowing leaf-like appendages. These fleshy protrusions branch and fan outward in chaotic, asymmetrical patterns, perfectly replicating the jagged, tattered edges of decaying macroalgae. Crucially, these spectacular, leafy fronds serve absolutely zero aerodynamic or locomotive purpose. They do not help the animals swim. In fact, they create an immense amount of drag. Their singular, exclusive function is the total disruption of recognizable form. A predatory fish looks for the smooth, streamlined curve of flank, the distinct V-shape of the tail fin, or the recognizable silhouette of the head. The sea dragon's appendages violently fragment these visual cues, breaking the continuous lines of the body into a random, disorganized cluster of shapes. Coated in a shifting palette of olive greens, deep brown, and pale yellows, heavily modeled to mimic the decay of plant matter, the sea dragon's physical presence is completely erased. However, possessing the physical shape of seaweed is useless if the illusion is betrayed by the wrong kind of movement. A plant does not swim with purpose. It surrenders entirely to the physics of the water. To maintain its masquerade, the leafy sea dragon has had completely abandoned the typical mechanics of aquatic locomotion. It cannot flick a powerful tail to propel itself forward, nor can it use large, sweeping pectoral fins, as these actions generate highly recognizable hydrodynamic ripples that would instantly alert the lateral lines of nearby predators. Instead, the sea dragon relies on a system of propulsion that borders on invisible. Located just behind its head, almost entirely transparent, are two microscopic pectoral fins, and further down its back lies a similarly transparent dorsal fin. These fins oscillate at an incredibly high frequency, fluttering rapidly while remaining almost completely invisible to the naked eye. This delicate, high-speed fluttering generates a smooth, highly controlled propulsion that creates virtually zero turbulence in the surrounding water. By using this invisible engine, the sea dragon can carefully navigate through seagrass beds while its body physically mimics the passive, aimless drift of floating debris. It does not swim against the current. It synchronizes its movements with the rhythm of the tidal surge, swaying back and forth in perfect harmony with the actual plants around it. To a passing shark or a hunting seal, the hydrodynamic signature of the sea dragon is completely indistinguishable from the background noise of the ocean. Yet, despite this total commitment to playing the role of a lifeless plant, the leafy sea dragon is a highly effective, ruthlessly precise predator. Its survival demands massive amounts of energy to fuel those rapidly oscillating fins, and it must acquire that energy without ever breaking its disguise. Its diet consists entirely of tiny, swarming crustaceans, specifically misted shrimp and copepods, which gather in dense clouds around the kelp forests. Because the sea dragon cannot chase them, it must rely on stealth and a highly specialized biomechanical hunting apparatus. The front of the sea dragon's face extends into a long, rigid, tubular snout. It lacks teeth, and it lacks a traditional jaw that opens and closes. Instead, the snout functions as a high-velocity biological vacuum tube. As the sea dragon drifts passively through a swarm of microscopic shrimp, looking for all the world like a harmless piece of floating trash, it imperceptibly angles its head toward a target. Then, utilizing an incredibly rapid, elastic mechanism in its throat, it violently expands its buccal cavity. This action creates an instantaneous, highly localized drop in water pressure, a micro-vacuum, that forcefully inhales the water and the unsuspecting shrimp directly into its snout in a fraction of a millisecond. The strike is entirely silent, generates no outward physical struggle, and causes no disturbance in the surrounding water. The sea dragon simply drifts, inhales, and continues its masquerade, swallowing its prey whole while remaining completely undetected by both the shrimp and the predators watching from above. Maintaining this level of absolute, paralyzing stillness while actively hunting places a massive, contradictory demand on the animal's sensory systems. If the sea dragon were forced to turn its entire body to look around for food or danger, the sudden, deliberate movement would shatter the illusion of passive drift. Evolution has elegantly solved this problem by granting the sea dragon the ability to rotate its eyes entirely independently. One I can swivel downward to lock onto a cluster of shrimp hiding in the seagrass, while the other I simultaneously rotates upward and backward, scanning the water column for the shadowy silhouette of a larger threat. This independent ocular rotation grants the sea dragon a near-panoramic, 360-degree field of vision. It is a creature capable of maintaining supreme, hyper-vigilant situational awareness without ever needing to twitch a single muscle in its neck, a perfect marriage of intense sensory processing and absolute physical restraint. The narrative of this incredible species becomes even more astonishing when examining its reproductive biology, which completely subverts the standard rules of the animal kingdom. Like its seahorse cousins, the leafy sea dragon exhibits a total reversal of traditional gender roles. It is a male who takes on the immense physical burden of pregnancy and incubation. However, unlike a seahorse, the male sea dragon does not possess an enclosed, protective brood pouch. During the intricate, gracefully synchronized mating dance, the female transfers up to 200 brightly colored neon pink eggs directly onto a specialized, highly vascularized patch of skin located on the underside of the male's tail. This creates a seemingly impossible, incredibly dangerous contradiction. The entire survival strategy of the leafy sea dragon is predicated on absolute visual concealment, yet the pregnant male must carry a massive cluster of bright pink, highly visible eggs attached directly to the outside of his body. For several weeks, he becomes a walking contradiction. To mitigate this extreme vulnerability, the male must rely even more heavily on his behavioral camouflage. He retreats deeper into the densest, most chaotic patches of the kelp forest, committing entirely to the illusion of stillness. The specialized tissue on his tail supplies the developing embryos with vital oxygen, and he gently, meticulously sways his body to aerate the eggs in the current. He bears this incredible risk, becoming a living nursery dressed as a dead leaf, until the eggs finally hatch and release perfect miniature, fully independent sea dragons into the water column, ready to begin their own lifelong masquerades. The sheer unmatched specialization of the leafy sea dragon is the product of millions of years of intense, unforgiving evolutionary pressure. The temperate waters of southern Australia are heavily populated by highly visual, intelligent predators. In this relentless arms race, any ancestor of the sea dragon that displayed even slightly less disruptive camouflage or moved with slightly too much purpose was immediately identified and consumed. The modern leafy sea dragon represents the absolute, surviving pinnacle of this process, a creature sculpted by the very predators it hides from. But this extreme specialization is a double-edged sword, a creature so perfectly, intricately adapted to one highly specific environment becomes catastrophically vulnerable if that environment changes. The leafy sea dragon cannot adapt to a bare sandy bottom, nor can it hide in an open coral reef. Its survival is inextricably, permanently tied to the health and abundance of the seagrass meadows and kelp forests of Australia. Today, these critical coastal habitats face unprecedented, accelerating threats from human activity. Agricultural runoff, severe coastal development, industrial pollution, and the rapid, devastating effects of climate-induced ocean warming are systematically destroying the vast underwater forests. When the seagrass dies and the kelp rots away, the leafy sea dragon is left with nowhere to hide. Without the chaotic, moving tapestry of vegetation to conceal it, the animal's elaborate, leafy appendages are instantly transformed from a flawless disguise into a bizarre, highly conspicuous target. It is stripped of its only defense. Because of its absolute reliance on a specific habitat, the leafy sea dragon serves as a highly sensitive, tragic indicator species for the ecological health of the entire southern marine environment. When the sea dragons begin to vanish, it is a silent, undeniable alarm that the complex ecosystem that supports them is actively collapsing. As the late afternoon sun dips toward the horizon, the angle of the light shifting to the water transforms the kelp forest into a deep, shadowy labyrinth of silhouetted vines and emerald corridors. Within this darkening, constantly moving world, the leafy sea dragon continues its eternal, silent drift. It sways gently back and forth, pushed by a tidal current it makes no effort to resist, utterly indistinguishable from the thousands of torn fronds that surround it. Massive, sleek predators pass just overhead, their keen eyes sweeping the water, searching desperately for a biological anomaly that simply isn't there. In this delicate, breathtaking balance between presence and absence, the true essence of the leafy sea dragon survival strategy is revealed. It is a creature that does not attempt to conquer its environment through physical strength, intimidation, or speed. Instead, it transcends the very categories by which the world interprets reality. It is an evolutionary phantom, an animal that endures the brutal, unforgiving ocean by achieving the ultimate, masterful disappearing act. The leafy sea dragon stands as a profound reminder that in the vast theater of nature, the most powerful and effective defense is not the ability to fight back or the speed to run away, but the brilliant, unrivaled power to simply never be recognized at all. The water appears perfectly clear, an inviting, boundless expanse of tropical blue where the intense, unfiltered sunlight penetrates effortlessly all the way down to the pale, sandy seabed. There are no jagged coral formations to cast deep shadows, no swaying forests of kelp to obscure the view. It is an environment defined by total, uncompromised visibility. A small, silver fish darts through the sunlit void, its movement sharp and confident. To its perfectly evolved eyes, the surrounding water column is entirely empty. It registers no creeping silhouettes, no sudden flashes of color, no looming shapes breaking the surface. Then, without a single ripple of warning, Tranquility dissolves into absolute biological catastrophe. The fish violently convulses in mid-swim, its body suddenly seized and contorted by invisible, searing threads that, mere milliseconds earlier, simply did not exist. There is no audible disturbance, no dramatic chase, no crushing impact. There is only the sudden, terrifying onset of total paralysis. The architect of this silent execution is the Box Jellyfish. It is a creature whose ultimate, most formidable weapon is not aggression, speed, or brute physical force, but the terrifying, flawless illusion of absolute absence. It survives and dominates by turning the ocean itself into the ultimate camouflage, ensuring that lethal danger remains entirely undetected until physical contact makes escape an absolute impossibility. In the warm, shallow coastal waters of the Indo-Pacific and the treacherous, mangrove-lined estuaries of northern Australia, the marine landscape is vastly different from the chaotic, structurally complex architecture of a coral reef. Here, the water is open, the current are gentle, and the environment offers virtually nowhere for a predator to hide. For most hunters, this lack of cover makes stalking prey a near impossibility. But the box jellyfish has circumvented this problem by discarding the need for physical cover entirely. It does not hide behind the environment. It effectively becomes the environment. As it drifts through the warm shallows, its body presents an optical masterclass in light manipulation. The bell of the jellyfish, shaped like a pale, translucent cube, refracts and transmits the penetrating sunlight in a manner that renders it almost indistinguishable from the surrounding, shimmering water. Its trailing tentacles, which can extend for several meters behind its body, resemble nothing more than faint, momentary distortions in the fluid, like the heat waves rising off hot asphalt. To the visual processing centers of both predators and prey alike, the animal simply does not register as a solid object. It exists perpetually at the absolute threshold of perception, a ghost of the shallows that is detectable only when it is already far too late. This near-perfect invisibility is not merely a passive, fortunate accident of the biology. It is the result of intricate, highly evolved physiological specialization. The tissues that comprise the box jellyfish are composed of nearly 95% water, with an absolute minimum of organic pigmentation to interrupt the passage of light. Furthermore, its internal cellular structures are specifically arranged on a microscopic level to drastically reduce the scattering of light rays. When sunlight hits a solid object, it scatters, creating the visual signature that eyes are trained to detect. The box jellyfish allows that light to pass directly through its body undisturbed, seamlessly blending the geometry of its form into the background of the infinite blue. Yet, to label the box jellyfish as a simple, drifting phantom would be a profound underestimation of its capabilities. Unlike the vast majority of other jellyfish species, which are largely at the mercy of the wind and the ocean currents, the box jellyfish possesses a terrifying degree of behavioral sophistication and physical autonomy. They are not passive drifters. They are active, directed swimmers. By utilizing powerful, rhythmic contractions of the muscular bell, they can purposefully navigate to the water column, propelling themselves forward with surprising speed and agility. This crucial mobility allows them to actively hunt, They can strategically position themselves in areas of high prey density, such as the mouths of tidal rivers or the edges of dense seagrass beds, actively transforming what appears to be a mindless, floating organism into a deliberate, calculating hunter. The most profound, almost paradoxical aspect of the box jellyfish's biology lies in its sensory perception. It is an animal that is practically invisible to the world, yet possesses the ability to see the world with shocking, unprecedented clarity. Embedded deeply within the edges of its translucent bell are highly specialized sensory structures known as ropalia. Housed within these structures are true, complex eyes. While most jellyfish possess only rudimentary eye spots capable of distinguishing basic light from dark, the box jellyfish is equipped with multiple sets of eyes featuring actual corneas, sophisticated lenses, and functioning retinas. This incredibly advanced visual system allows the creature to detect complex shapes, avoid physical obstacles, and even recognize the distinct silhouettes of potential prey in the water column. This sensory capability represents a staggering evolutionary innovation among the cnidarians, a group of animals universally associated with the most primitive, simple nervous systems on Earth. Because they do not possess a centralized brain, the visual data is processed through an incredibly complex, decentralized nerve ring that runs around the perimeter of the bell. This allows the invisible predator to actively navigate around the dense, tangled roots of the mangrove forest without becoming entangled, optimizing its hunting paths and adjusting its depth to intercept schools of small fish. It is a biological paradox of the highest order, an animal that relies entirely on not being seen, constantly watching its environment with perfectly evolved, unblinking eyes. However, the true, apocalyptic lethality of the box jellyfish is entirely concentrated within its trailing tentacles. These seemingly delicate, invisible threads are lined with millions upon millions of highly specialized, weaponized cells known as cnidocytes. Within each of these microscopic cells is a structure called an nematocyst, which functions as a biological, spring-loaded harpoon kept under immense, violently high internal osmotic pressure. These nematocysts act as the most sensitive, deadly tripwires in the natural world. They are not triggered by a conscious decision from the jellyfish. They are triggered mechanically by the absolute slightest physical friction, or by the specific chemical signature of an animal's skin brushing against the invisible strand. The moment that microscopic threshold is crossed, the mechanism fires. The discharge in the nematocyst is an event of explosive, mind-boggling speed, occurring in a fraction of a microsecond. The microscopic, barbed thread is violently expelled, easily penetrating the scales, shell, or skin of the victim, and instantly injecting a highly potent, deeply complex cocktail of catastrophic toxins. The venom of the box jellyfish is considered one of the most toxic, rapidly acting biological substances on the planet. It contains a devastating mix of specialized proteins and enzymes designed to immediately disrupt cellular membranes, violently interfere with all nerve signaling, and aggressively attack the cardiovascular system. When a small fish or a passing crustacean inadvertently swims through this invisible curtain of death, the physical effects are instantaneous and absolute. The massive influx of neurotoxins causes immediate, rigid paralysis, ensuring that the prey cannot thrash, struggle, or mount any form of escape response that might damage the jellyfish's delicate tentacles. For larger animals, including human beings who have the terrible misfortune of wading into these waters, the venom induces a level of physical agony that defies description. The toxins cause rapid, overwhelming cardiovascular distress, triggering severe cardiac arrhythmias, uncontrollable muscle spasms, and in severe cases, cardiac arrest within minutes of contact. This horrific chemical mechanism transforms the box jellyfish's gentle transparency into a devastating, apocalyptic offensive strategy. The sheer absence of any visual warning exponentially amplifies the effectiveness of its venom, because the victim is heavily dosed before its brain can even register that it has encountered a threat. The actual hunting process unfolds with chilling mechanical efficiency. As the jellyfish propels itself smoothly through the shallow water, its lethal tentacles trail behind it, fanning out like a wide, nearly invisible dragnet. When a fish accidentally brushes against a single strand, thousands of nematocysts fire simultaneously, locking the prey into a state of immediate, permanent paralysis. The jellyfish then halts its forward momentum. The affected tentacle slowly, methodically contracts, pulling the incapacitated, helpless organism upward toward the mouth, which is located on a short, prehensile stalk at the very center of the bell's underside. Because the box jellyfish has a relatively simple digestive tract, the process of breaking down the prey begins almost immediately. Strong digestive enzymes are released, slowly dissolving the fish's tissues before the partially liquefied meal is fully ingested into the gastrovascular cavity. This entire gruesome sequence of events occurs so rapidly and with such overwhelming chemical force that the prey is effectively dead the moment it touches the invisible wire. The absolute success of this strategy highlights a deeply profound truth about predator-prey dynamics in the ocean. By completely eliminating all detectable visual and physical cues, the box jellyfish ensures that the battle is won before the victim even realizes it has begun. Beyond its terrifying reputation as a silent, invisible killer, the box jellyfish occupies a highly significant, foundational role within the ecology of coastal marine ecosystems. As a highly efficient, high-volume predator, it acts as a crucial biological regulator, actively controlling the exploding populations of small pelagic fish, shrimp, and planktonic organisms that swarm the coastal shallows. By continuously harvesting these populations, the jellyfish prevents them from over-consuming the microscopic phytoplankton and zooplankton that form the very base of the marine food web. The presence of box jellyfish also dictates the spatial movement and behavior of other species. Entire schools of fish will instinctively alter their migratory routes and feeding patterns to avoid areas where the invisible predators are known to congregate. Yet, despite their overwhelming toxicity, the box jellyfish is not exempt from the brutal, cyclical nature of the food chain. They serve as a primary high-value food source for certain highly specialized, heavily armored predators. The leatherback sea turtle, for instance, has evolved a profound physiological immunity to the devastating toxins of the box jellyfish. Armed with thick, keratinized scales, eyelids that protect its corneas from the stinging cells, and a throat lined with sharp, backward-pointing papillae to prevent the slippery jellyfish from escaping. The sea turtle wades directly into the invisible minefields, consuming the deadly creatures with absolute impunity. These intense, specialized interactions highlight the deeply interconnected, constantly shifting balance of marine food webs, proving that even the most venomous, formidable organisms on Earth are seamlessly integrated into the broader, violent machinery of nature. The life history of the box jellyfish introduces an entirely different layer of strange, alien complexity to their existence. Like many ancient Idarians, they undergo a bizarre, multi-stage life cycle that completely blurs the lines of standard reproduction. It involves alternating between two entirely different physical forms, a sexual, free-swimming Medusa stage and an asexual, stationary polyp stage. The adult, transparent killers that drift through the shallows, the Medusae, gather in massive groups during specific times of the year to release their gametes directly into the water column. When fertilization occurs, it creates thousands of microscopic, free-swimming larvae known as planulae. These tiny, ciliated larvae drift helplessly with the tides for several days before sinking to bottom and attaching themselves to a hard, submerged surface, a rock, a mangrove root, or a discarded shell. Once anchored, the larva undergoes profound metamorphosis, transforming into a tiny, sedentary, plant-like creature called a polyp. This polyp can survive on the seafloor for months, feeding on passing microscopic organisms. But the true evolutionary advantage of the polyp stage is its ability to clone itself. Through a process of asexual reproduction, a single polyp can aggressively multiply, creating entire colonies of genetically identical clones. When environmental conditions, such as water temperature, salinity levels, and daylight hours, align perfectly, these polyps undergo one final, dramatic transformation. They metamorphose and detach from the seafloor, releasing thousands of tiny, perfectly formed juvenile box jellyfish into the water column. This dual-layered reproductive strategy grants the species an explosive, terrifying capacity for population expansion. When the seasonal conditions are favorable, it leads to massive, sudden blooms where thousands of highly venomous, invisible predators suddenly appear in the coastal waters overnight. These blooms have profound, far-reaching ecological and socioeconomic implications, shutting down entire coastlines, decimating local fish populations, and fundamentally altering the biological balance of the estuary. The evolutionary success of this invisible predator is deeply, inextricably rooted in its masterful ability to exploit the sensory limitations of every other animal in the ocean. In the incredibly clear, sun-drenched waters of the tropics, almost all marine species rely primarily on visual cues to survive. They scan for the sharp outlines of predators, the flash of warning colors, or the sudden, erratic movement of an attack. By systematically minimizing its optical signature until it's functionally zero, the box jellyfish completely bypasses these primary detection systems. This represents the ultimate form of environmental deception. The organism does not mimic a harmless plant, nor does it attempt to look like a rock. Instead, it becomes an invisible extension of the water itself. The resulting ambiguity forces every other animal to blindly navigate a terrifying, high-stakes landscape where the presence of mortal danger is not signaled by a looming shadow or a flash of teeth, but by the absolute, chilling absence of any discernible threat whatsoever. Human encounters with the box jellyfish serve as a dark, sobering illustration of the raw, uncompromising potency of the survival system. Every year, unsuspecting swimmers, divers, and local fishermen wade into the calm, inviting, seemingly safe tropical waters, completely unawares of the invisible, drifting hazards that surround them. The sudden, agonizing onset of envenomation, characterized by burning, whip-like welts across the skin, overwhelming physiological panic, and severe respiratory distress, underscores the flawless, brutal effectiveness of the jellyfish's evolutionary strategy. These tragic interactions have forced humanity to adapt to the reality of the marine environment, prompting the creation of extensive monitoring networks, the deployment of physical stinger nets to protect beaches, and the widespread distribution of antivenoms. It is a stark, undeniable reminder that we are entering a wilderness where we are profoundly vulnerable to the unseen, ancient mechanisms of the natural world. On a broader, global scale, the box jellyfish has also emerged as a highly sensitive biological indicator of rapid, human-induced environmental change. Over the past few decades, scientists have recorded a massive, unnatural increase in the frequency and severity of box jellyfish blooms worldwide. These explosions in population are heavily associated with extreme alterations in oceanographic conditions. As global climate change drastically warms coastal waters, it creates a perfect, extended breeding season for the benthic polyps. The massive influx of agricultural fertilizers running off the land into the ocean creates nutrient-rich dead zones, promoting the growth of the plankton that the jellyfish consume, while simultaneously suffocating the larger fish that would normally compete with them for food. Furthermore, the relentless, global overfishing of their natural predators, such as sea turtles and large pelagic fish, has removed the top-down pressure that once kept their populations in check. As a result, the invisible hunters are multiplying. The study of their shifting population dynamics provides researchers with highly valuable, urgent insights into the deteriorating health and stability of coastal marine ecosystems. Understanding the triggers behind these blooms is absolutely essential for predicting the future impacts of a warming planet and for developing strategies to mitigate the profound effects of climate change on both marine biodiversity and the human communities that depend on the sea. Despite its dark reputation as one of the ocean's most dangerous, unforgiving creatures, the box jellyfish embodies a form of evolutionary elegance defined by absolute, terrifying efficiency and unparalleled subtlety. It does not rely on elaborate, threatening displays of pufferfish, the crushing mechanical force of mantis shrimp, or the aggressive, high-speed pursuit of a shark. Instead, it harnesses the fundamental, physical properties of light, water, and perception to create an environment where the very concept of visual detection is entirely eliminated. This approach reflects a broader, profound principle in evolutionary biology. The most effective, unassailable survival strategies in nature often involve the total manipulation of sensory information rather than the exertion of physical force. By successfully transforming the clear, beautiful waters of the tropics into a deceptive, lethal veil, the box jellyfish perfectly exemplifies the devastating power of absence as both a defensive shield and an offensive weapon. As the sun begins to set over the tropical lagoon and the bright, shimmering surface of the ocean slowly reflects the deep, fading purples and reds of the evening light, the box jellyfish continues its silent, eternal passage through the water column. Its translucent, gelatinous form drifts almost imperceptibly on the shifting tide. Its lethal tentacles remain fully extended, trailing like delicate, invisible threads of glass in a vast, seemingly empty expanse. Below it, the nocturnal shift of the reef begins to awaken. Small fish resume their frantic movements, navigating the tranquil, darkening environment with absolutely no indication of the hidden, chemical danger that surrounds them on all sides. In this quiet, deeply unsettling tableau, the absolute essence of the box jellyfish's evolutionary strategy becomes unmistakably clear. It is the ultimate manifestation of survival achieved not through physical confrontation, not through speed, and not through armor, but through absolute, uncompromising invisibility. It is a creature that transforms the ocean itself into both its sanctuary and its weapon. The final, lingering image is one profound, terrifying stillness, a quiet, drifting reminder that in the vast, ancient depths of the natural world, the most profound and devastating threats are almost always the ones that cannot be seen until their terrible, lethal effects are already unfolding. A slender ribbon of movement glides effortlessly through the warm, sun-dappled coastal shallows. Its motion is so exquisitely smooth, so deliberately unhurried, that it barely disturbs the surrounding water. It weaves through a dense thicket of branching coral, its body moving in a hypnotic, fluid sine wave that seems perfectly synchronized with the gentle pushing and pulling of the tidal surge. A small damselfish, normally hyper-alert to the frantic, darting movements of reef predators, continues to feed on a patch of algae, seemingly untroubled by the approaching figure. There's no aggressive flaring of fins. There is no sudden, terrifying acceleration. There is no dramatic, posturing display of threat. The approaching creature simply drifts closer, projecting an aura of absolute, indifferent tranquility. Then, in a fraction of a millisecond, that profound calm violently dissolves into an act of unparalleled, lethal precision. The snake's head snaps forward with the mechanical, surgical accuracy of a triggered trap. The jaws part, the strike lands, and the fish instantly convulses as a devastating chemical payload begins its silent, irreversible work. What appeared serene, graceful, and almost entirely harmless is instantly revealed to be one of the ocean's most highly evolved, ruthlessly efficient predators. The sea snake survives the brutal, competitive arena of the coral reef not through sheer physical intimidation, massive size, or explosive speed, but by embodying one of nature's most deeply deceptive biological signals, the illusion of absolute composure. In the intricate, high-stakes tapestry of tropical marine ecosystems, visual cues are the primary currency of survival. Many of the ocean's most formidable predators actively advertise their danger. They announce their presence through bold, high-contrast warning coloration, aggressive, territorial postures, or the brandishing of formidable physical structures like massive jaws or venomous spines. They rely on fear to control their environment. The sea snake utterly defies this universal convention. Its elongated, elegantly streamlined body and its gentle, wave-like movements actively project an image of vulnerability and peace rather than imminent threat. This understated, almost hypnotic presence allows the sea snake to approach highly skittish prey without triggering the rapid, panic-induced escape responses that are typically associated with more conspicuous, aggressive hunters. By perfectly exploiting the deeply ingrained tendency of marine organisms to prioritize sudden motion, erratic behavior, and dramatic, looming silhouettes as the ultimate indicators of danger, the sea snake transforms subtlety into a devastating predatory advantage. It hacks the risk assessment software of every fish on the reef, convincing them that it is merely a harmless, drifting part of the background scenery until the exact moment its fangs breach their scales. The biological foundation of this terrifyingly calm strategy lies in a series of profound, almost unbelievable evolutionary modifications. The sea snake is a creature caught between two worlds. Descended directly from terrestrial land-dwelling ancestors, it has undergone a radical, comprehensive physiological redesign that enables it to not just survive, but to entirely dominate the marine environment. Its body has been aggressively laterally compressed by millions of years of evolution, flattening out to form a highly efficient, paddle-like tail. This anatomical shift provides the snake with incredibly smooth, powerful propulsion to the dense medium of water, allowing it to navigate the complex, jagged architecture of the reef with absolute, frictionless grace. To conquer the fundamental problem of breathing in a submerged world, the sea snake has evolved specialized, highly modified valve nostril positioned perfectly on the very top, the dorsal surface, of its snout. This ingenious placement allows the animal to casually break the surface of the ocean, take a rapid, deep breath, and instantly seal the valve shut, completely minimizing the intake of salt water during its prolonged dives. But the true marvel of its respiratory adaptation lies hidden deep within its elongated body. Internally, the sea snake possesses a massive, greatly expanded right lung that stretches almost the entire length of its body, from its neck down to its tail. This spectacular organ serves a critical dual purpose. It functions as an enormous onboard biological oxygen tank, and it simultaneously acts as a highly sensitive buoyancy control device. By precisely regulating the volume of air trapped within this elongated lung, the sea snake can achieve perfect neutral buoyancy. It can hover effortlessly in the water column, neither sinking to the bottom nor floating to the top, expending zero muscular energy to maintain its position. This extraordinary respiratory adaptation enables sea snakes to remain deeply submerged for staggering periods of time, frequently exceeding an hour, and in some species, up to several hours on a single breath. This allows them to methodically, patiently hunt within the deeply complex, shadowed underwater landscapes where prey organisms mistakenly feel they are safe from air-breathing predators. Despite their graceful, unthreatening demeanor, sea snakes possess a chemical arsenal of truly terrifying, world-class potency. Tucked neatly within their upper jaw, connected to a pair of short, fixed front fangs, are highly specialized venom glands that produce a complex, overwhelmingly lethal cocktail of neurotoxins and myotoxins. These chemicals are specifically and mercilessly engineered by evolution to immobilize cold-blooded prey with terrifying efficiency. When injected, the neurotoxins immediately attack the victim's nervous system, violently interfering with neuromuscular transmission. They block the signals from the brain to the muscles, leading to rapid, systemic paralysis. Simultaneously, the myotoxins aggressively attack the muscle tissue itself, breaking down the cellular structure of the prey from the inside out. Because sea snakes often hunt in incredibly tight, confined spaces of coral reefs, rocky crevices, and dense seagrass beds, they cannot afford for their prey to thrash, struggle, or escape deeper into an inaccessible hole. The venom ensures that the prey is locked into absolute paralysis almost the instant the fangs connect. Yet, unlike many of their highly aggressive terrestrial cousins, the cobras and vipers that rely on dramatic, hissing defensive displays and readily expend their venom to deter threats, sea snakes typically employ their chemical weapons with chilling precision and extreme restraint. They conserve their highly metabolic venom exclusively for hunting, rarely using it for confrontation. The selective, disciplined use of their lethality heavily reinforces their reputation as animals that appear far less dangerous than they truly are. The actual hunting behavior of the sea snake is a masterclass in specialized, systematic predation, finely tuned to the specific ecological niches they occupy. Many species have evolved to become highly specialized hunters of eels, gobies, and small, bottom-dwelling fish that inhabit the deepest, darkest burrows and narrowest crevices within the reef structure. The snake's slender, highly flexible, limbless body allows it to seamlessly navigate these tight, confined spaces with ease. It probes deep into hidden recesses and subterranean tunnels that are entirely physically inaccessible to bulkier, more traditional marine predators like sharks or groupers. The sea snake does not need to chase its prey in the open water. It simply infiltrates the prey's most secure, impenetrable fortress. To locate these hidden victims in the pitch-black darkness of a coral crevice, the sea snake relies on a sensory world that is completely invisible to human understanding. While their vision is well adapted for bright, underwater environments of the shallows, their true hunting prowess is guided by an incredibly acute, highly developed sense of smell. Using a specialized forked tongue that flicks constantly into the water column, the sea snake collects microscopic, waterborne chemical particles. It draws these particles back into its mouth and presses them against the Jacobson's organ, a highly sensitive chemoreceptive structure located in the roof of its mouth. This allows the snake to literally taste the chemical trails left behind by a frightened fish or a hidden eel, tracking its victim through the complex maze of the reef with flawless chemical precision. Recent scientific research has also revealed that sea snakes possess a network of highly specialized, microscopic mechanoreceptors embedded within the scales of their heads. These tiny sensors act like biological sonar, allowing the snake to perceive the most incredibly subtle, minute water movements and hydrodynamic pressure waves generated by the breathing or shifting of a concealed animal. These deep, multi-layered sensory adaptations perfectly complement their stealthy, methodical hunting strategy, ensuring that their calm, unhurried exterior conceals a profoundly sophisticated, hyper-aware system of environmental surveillance. A deeper, even more astonishing layer of biological complexity emerges when examining the physiological innovations that allow the sea snake to survive the relentless, dehydrating hostility of a purely marine lifestyle. In addition to their massive pulmonary lung, many species of sea snakes possess the miraculous ability to absorb oxygen directly from the surrounding water through their skin. This process, known as cutaneous respiration, can provide up to 25% of the animal's total oxygen requirements. This profound adaptation drastically enhances their capacity for prolonged, deep submersion. It allows them to exploit deeper, more remote benthic habitats where frequent surfacing for air would be energetically costly and would drastically increase their vulnerability to aerial predators like sea eagles. Furthermore, existing in a hypersaline environment presents a massive, constant physiological nightmare for an animal with terrestrial biology: the threat of severe, fatal dehydration. To conquer the ocean's salt, the sea snake has evolved a highly specialized, highly efficient salt-excreting gland located directly beneath its tongue. As the snake inevitably swallows seawater while capturing and swallowing its prey, the sublingual gland actively filters the excess sodium and chloride from the animal's bloodstream, concentrating it into a thick, salty brine that the snake simply expels from its mouth with a flick of its tongue. This brilliant piece of physiological engineering enables the sea snake to maintain perfect osmotic balance in a saline environment that would rapidly kill a land snake, illustrating the incredibly intricate, microscopic adjustments required to conquer the sea. The narrative of the sea snake's deceptive calmness extends far beyond its predatory tactics to completely define its interactions with potential, massive threats. While they possess venom that is exponentially more toxic than a terrestrial cobra, sea snakes are generally remarkably non-aggressive. They rely entirely on avoidance, evasion, and illusion of peace rather than violent confrontation. Their calm, unhurried behavior drastically reduces the likelihood of provoking a fear-based, defensive response from other animals, including human divers. Most species will simply glide away when approached, showing absolutely zero interest in aggression. The incredibly rare instances of human envenomation almost exclusively occur when the animals are violently captured in fishing nets, inadvertently stepped on in the shallows, or aggressively handled, prompting a desperate, last-resort protective response. This profound behavioral restraint underscores the ultimate evolutionary advantage of subtlety. It demonstrates vividly that the absolute absence of overt aggression can itself function as the most highly effective, energy-saving protective mechanism in the natural world. By refusing to act like a threat, the sea snake ensures that it is rarely treated like one. The evolutionary journey of the sea snake reaches its absolute, most triumphant climax in its reproductive strategy. For millions of years, marine reptiles like sea turtles have been fundamentally tethered to land, forced to undertake massive, dangerous migrations to drag their heavy bodies onto sandy beaches just to lay their eggs. This physical limitation prevents them from truly, fully colonizing the open ocean. The sea snake, however, has entirely severed this final, ancient biological chain. Unlike the vast majority of reptiles, the most highly evolved species of sea snakes are entirely viviparous. They give birth to live, fully formed, perfectly independent young directly into the open water. The female retains the developing embryos deep within her body, nourishing them through a complex, placenta-like structure that facilitates the transfer of oxygen and nutrients. When the gestation is complete, she simply unfurls her body in the water column and releases a brood of miniature, highly venomous, perfectly adapted sea snakes that instantly swim away to begin their lives. This incredible transition to live birth represents a monumental evolutionary leap. It completely eliminates the need to ever return to the perilous, predator-filled terrestrial environment and has allowed sea snake populations to expand across vast, remote oceanic regions, colonizing deep pelagic environments and distant reef systems far removed from any coastline. It is the ultimate expression of their total, uncompromising conquest of the marine realm. Yet, despite their incredible physiological armor and their flawless, deceptive survival strategies, sea snakes occupy a highly precarious position in the modern, rapidly changing ocean. Their ecological role is absolutely vital. By systematically regulating the dense populations of burrowing fish, eels, and benthic invertebrates, they contribute heavily to the maintenance of balanced, stable community structures within coral reefs and seagrass ecosystems. Their presence actively shapes the distribution, behavior, and spatial mapping of countless other species, heavily influencing the flow of energy across the reef. In turn, they serve as a critical food source for highly specialized apex predators, integrating them deeply into the broader, violent machinery of the marine food web. But their reliance on coastal habitats makes them profoundly vulnerable to the devastating impacts of human activity. Massive, indiscriminate industrial trawling operations frequently capture sea snakes as unintended bycatch, drowning thousands of these air-breathing reptiles in their nets. The rapid, global degradation of coral reefs due to climate-induced ocean warming, the rampant destruction of coastal mangrove forests, and the heavy pollution of shallow estuaries violently strip away the complex, three-dimensional habitats that these animals require to hunt and survive. Because many species exhibit strong site fidelity, remaining within a single, specific reef system for their entire lives, the localized destruction of a habitat can lead to the immediate, total extinction of that specific population. Their quiet, unassuming nature masks an extreme vulnerability to a changing planet, underscoring the desperate, urgent need to preserve the delicate, deeply interconnected ecosystems upon which they and countless other species so heavily depend. As the tropical dusk slowly settles over the coastal shallows, the harsh, penetrating light of the day softens into the deep, ambiguous blues and purples of the evening. The sea snake continues its silent, relentless patrol through the darkening labyrinth of the reef. Its movements remain eternally fluid, perfectly unhurried, blending seamlessly with the gentle, rhythmic sway of the surrounding ocean. Small, nocturnal fish begin to emerge from the coral, navigating the seagrass beds, utterly unaware of the lethal predator moving silently among them until the exact, devastating fraction of a second when it is too late. The total absence of dramatic, threatening signals allows the sea snake to operate entirely within a hidden realm of deeply underestimated danger. It is an environment where pure calmness is actively weaponized, transformed into a strategic, lethal advantage rather than a sign of biological vulnerability. The enduring, haunting image of the sea snake is one of deeply deceptive serenity, a graceful, undulating ribbon of muscle gliding effortlessly through the water, embodying both absolute, breathtaking elegance and uncompromising, chemical lethality. The sea snake stands as a living, breathing testament to profound evolutionary power of understatement. It proves, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the most effective, unassailable predators in the natural world are not always the ones that announce their presence with massive size, explosive speed, or terrifying spectacle. By flawlessly harnessing the misleading psychological nature of calm behavior and seamlessly integrating it with potent, world-class chemical weaponry and profound physiological adaptation, the sea snake has secured a deeply unique, highly dominant, and enduring niche within the brutal architecture of the marine environment. In this quiet, subtle, yet incredibly lethal interplay between perception and reality, the sea snake demonstrates the profound, terrifying ways in which evolution can patiently transform absolute tranquility into one of the ocean's most formidable, inescapable strategies for survival. A small, exhausted reef fish darts frantically through a chaotic maze of jagged coral, desperately seeking refuge in the exposed, sunlit expanse of the open water. A shadow has passed overhead. The sleek, terrifying silhouette of a pelagic hunter, and the instinct to hide completely overrides all other senses. Ahead, carved deeply into the calcified architecture of the reef, lies what appears to be a guaranteed sanctuary. It is a narrow, claustrophobic crevice, cast in absolute darkness, perfectly sized to conceal a small body. To the terrified fish, this hollow cavity represents the ultimate biological safety net. Evolution has hardwired the inhabitants of the reef to associate deep shadows and impenetrable rock with protection. The fish slips inside the crack, its heart pounding, believing it has successfully vanished from the dangerous world above. But as the fish settles into gloom, the darkness suddenly, impossibly animates. The smooth stone walls of the crevice appear to shift. A pair of cold, unblinking eyes materializes out of the absolute blackness, followed by the terrifying realization that the cave is not a hollow void at all. It is a living, breathing throat. In a fraction of a millisecond, a lightning-fast strike shatters the illusion of safety. The cavity violently collapses inward, and the fish is dragged backward into the abyss. The sanctuary was a lie. The crevice was never empty. It was a concealed, heavily fortified threshold of a predator perfectly adapted to transform the absence of light into a lethal, inescapable weapon. The Moray eel survives and dominates not by hunting in the open ocean, but by exploiting one of the reef's most deeply ingrained, fatal misconceptions. The absolute belief that stillness and shadow signify safety rather than an impending catastrophic threat. Coral reefs are not solid mountains of stone. They're labyrinthine, three-dimensional metropolises completely riddled with countless millions of holes, twisting subterranean tunnels, and deep, cavernous overhangs. For the vast majority of small marine life, these structural voids are the only true defense against the overwhelming speed of the ocean's apex predators. When danger approaches, the reef literally absorbs its inhabitants. The Moray eel completely subverts this universal behavioral dynamic. It recognizes that the prey will inevitably flee into the darkness. There is absolutely no need to waste energy chasing them in the light. Instead, the eel permanently embeds itself deep within the reef's foundational architecture. It becomes a darkness. It transforms the very concept of safe haven into a highly localized, deeply camouflaged ambush site to physically occupy and maneuver within these suffocatingly narrow, jagged spaces. The Moray eel has completely discarded the traditional anatomical blueprint of a fish. Over millions of years of relentless evolutionary pressure, it has traded the rigid, hydrodynamic profile of an open water swimmer for a radically elongated, serpentine body of pure, densely packed muscle. It has entirely lost its pectoral and pelvic fins, the stabilizing appendages used by almost all other fish, because fins would only snag and tear against the sharp, abrasive walls of coral tunnel. Even its scales have been evolutionary erased. Instead, the Moray's heavily muscled body is wrapped in a thick, leathery skin, permanently coated in a highly specialized, viscous layer of toxic mucus. This incredibly slick biological lubricant serves a vital dual purpose. It acts as a chemical shield against parasites and bacterial infections that thrive in the stagnant dark, and it completely eliminates physical friction. It allows the massive eel to glide silently and effortlessly backward and forward through winding, razor-sharp crevices that would physically shred any other animal attempting to follow it. Because it spends its life wedged tightly inside the stone, typically with only its head exposed to the outside world, the Moray relies heavily on deep, structural camouflage. Its skin is deeply mottled with chaotic, irregular patterns of brown, green, and pale yellow, perfectly mirroring the complex textures of dead coral, encrusting sponges and shifting shadows. It blends so seamlessly into the geological framework of the reef that an unwary diver or a passing fish can swim within inches of the eel's face without ever registering its presence. This perfect concealment is often accompanied by a highly misunderstood behavioral trait that has unfairly earned the Moray a reputation for mindless, aggressive malice. As the eel rests in its crevice, it constantly, rhythmically opens and closes its jaws, displaying rows of needle-sharp, terrifying teeth. To human observers and other fish, this incessant gaping looks exactly like a direct, highly aggressive threat display, a creature panting in anticipation of a kill. But the reality is entirely physiological, driven by the suffocating constraints of its chosen habitat. Most fish possess specialized bony flaps called opercula that actively pump fresh, oxygen-rich water over their gills. The Moray eel, deeply wedged in a tight, low-oxygen hole, has lost these large pumping structures. To breathe, it must manually, forcefully gulp water into its mouth and push it back over its small, restricted gill openings located behind its head. The terrifying, rhythmic baring of its teeth is not an aggressive posture. It is simply the animal breathing. Yet, this eerie, mechanical gaping inadvertently reinforces the deeply unsettling ambiguity of its presence, a creature that is neither fully hidden nor overtly attacking, but existing in a constant state of lethal, coiled readiness. When an unsuspecting fish or a crawling octopus wanders too close to this breathing stone, the Moray executes an ambush of staggering biomechanical violence. Driven by the massive, thick bands of muscle running down its neck, the eel launches its head forward with explosive, blinding acceleration. The jaw snaps shut and the trap is sprung. But capturing the prey is only the first half of the predatory equation. The true, terrifying ingenuity of the Moray eel's design lies in how it secures its meal. The teeth lining its primary jaws are long, razor-sharp, and crucially, they are recurved, hooked aggressively backward toward the throat. Once these teeth sink into flesh, any frantic, struggling movement by the prey only drives the hooks deeper, making physical escape an absolute impossibility. However, holding onto a thrashing fish while wedged inside a narrow tube presents a massive physical dilemma. Most predatory fish consume their prey using suction feeding. They rapidly expand their throats to create a vacuum, sucking the prey backward into their stomachs. But Moray eel is trapped in a tight, confined space. It physically cannot expand its throat wide enough to generate the necessary suction. If it simply let go with its front teeth to try and swallow, the prey would instantly escape. To solve this impossible problem, evolution has equipped the Moray eel with a piece of biological hardware so terrifying and alien that it seems pulled directly from the realm of science fiction. Hidden deep within the eel's throat, resting silently behind the primary jaws, is a second, fully functional set of jaws known as pharyngeal jaws. These internal jaws are equipped with their own set of razor-sharp, recurved teeth. When the primary jaws lock onto a victim at the front of the mouth, the Moray does not attempt to swallow. Instead, a complex, specialized network of muscles violently launches the pharyngeal jaws forward, projecting them out of the throat and directly into the oral cavity. This secondary mouth physically bites down on the trapped prey, securing a second, unbreakable grip. The primary jaws then briefly release their hold, and the pharyngeal jaws aggressively retract, dragging the struggling victim backward, deep into the digestive tract. This alternating, ratchet-like mechanism ensures that once a creature is caught, it is inexorably pulled into the darkness. It is an adaptation of flawless, horrifying efficiency, completely circumventing the physical limitations of the eel's claustrophobic environment and transforming the initial ambush into a swift, brutally decisive conclusion. By securing and consuming its prey entirely within protective confines of its lair, the Moray eel completely minimizes its exposure to the dangerous, open world. A fresh kill in the ocean instantly attracts a chaotic frenzy of opportunistic scavengers, aggressive competitors, and larger apex predators drawn by the scent of blood. The Moray bypasses this entirely. It eats in absolute privacy, heavily guarding its energetic resources. This highly localized strategy allows the eel to exploit the resources of a relatively small, specific territory, drastically reducing the massive energetic costs associated with active, open water hunting. The structural complexity of the reef provides a permanent, stable fortress, and many morays exhibit incredibly strong site fidelity. An individual eel may occupy, fiercely defend, and hunt from the exact same crevice for years, establishing a deep, intimate familiarity with the specific spatial dynamics, current flows, and prey pathways of its chosen microhabitat. Yet, to cast the Moray eel purely as a solitary, isolated killer lurking in the dark is to ignore one of the most astonishing, deeply complex ecological relationships in the entire marine world. Despite their terrifying predatory capabilities and fiercely territorial nature, giant Moray eels are known to frequently engage in highly coordinated, interspecies cooperative hunting with certain predatory fish, most notably the coral grouper. This is not a random, opportunistic overlap. It is a deliberate, communicated partnership. The interaction begins when a hungry grouper approaches a specific crevice where a moray is hiding. The grouper positions itself directly in front of the eel's face and performs a highly specific, rapid shaking of its head, a clear, universally understood biological signal, essentially requesting a joint hunting expedition. Incredibly, the moray eel recognizes the signal, leaves its protective sanctuary, and joins the grouper in the open water. The two predators then perfectly exploit their complementary, opposing evolutionary skill sets. The grouper is a master of the open water, capable of immense speed, but it is too large to fit into the coral heads where prey hide. The Moray eel is slow in the open, but can effortlessly penetrate the deepest, tightest crevices of the reef. Together, they form an inescapable trap. The grouper aggressively patrols the perimeter of the coral, driving terrified prey deep into the jagged holes. The Moray eel then slithers into those exact holes, violently flushing the prey back out into the open. If the prey stays hidden, the eel eats it. If the prey panics and flees into the blue, the waiting grouper consumes it. This brilliant, cross-species collaboration significantly increases the hunting success rate of both participants. It is a stunning display of mutual benefit that shatters the traditional, simplistic perception of predators as mindless, solitary competitors, revealing instead a nuanced, highly intelligent network of ecological relationships governed by communication and strategic alliances. This unexpected capacity for tolerance is further highlighted by the Moray eel's relationship with the reef's microscopic cleaning crews. Deep within the reef, there are designated cleaning stations operated by tiny, brightly colored cleaner wrasses and specialized, transparent cleaner shrimp. These highly vulnerable organisms provide a critical medical service, picking off dead tissue, fungal infections, and deeply embedded parasites from the skin and gills of larger fish. The Moray eel, heavily plagued by parasites in its dark environment, regularly visits these stations. When it arrives, the terrifying predator completely suppresses its violent instincts. It adopts a specific rigid posture, flaring its gills and opening its massive, tooth-lined jaws incredibly wide, holding perfectly still. It allows the tiny shrimp and fish to literally crawl inside its mouth, walking across the very teeth that crush bone, to pick parasites directly from its gums and throat. The eel refuses to snap its jaws shut, completely overriding its predatory drive in exchange for vital hygiene. This incredible behavior demonstrates a profoundly sophisticated, deeply ingrained balance between extreme aggression and necessary, calculated tolerance. It underscores the profound complexity of marine social dynamics, where even the most formidable, heavily armed predators must occasionally lay down their weapons and submit to the intricate, mutualistic networks that keep the reef alive. Operating from deep within the shadows requires a sensory system entirely independent of the sun. While their eyes are functional, the vision of a Moray eel is relatively poor, heavily adapted for low-light conditions but lacking sharp acuity. To compensate for this visual deficit, evolution has gifted the Moray with an incredibly acute, master-level sense of smell. Their nasal cavities are highly pronounced, equipped with specialized, tubular anterior nostrils that constantly funnel water over deeply folded, highly sensitive olfactory rosettes. This chemosensory capability is so profound that a Moray eel can detect a microscopic chemical signature of stressed, injured, or hiding fish from incredibly long distances, even when the prey is completely buried under sand or locked deep within a coral maze. In the enclosed, structured spaces of the reef, where water currents concentrate and channel scent trails like winding rivers of information, the Moray navigates almost entirely by tracking these invisible chemical maps. Additionally, highly sensitive mechanoreceptive pores line their jaws, allowing them to literally feel the subtle, rhythmic vibrations of a struggling fish in the pitch black. These overlapping sensory mechanisms perfectly compensate for the darkness of their habitat, ensuring that the Moray remains an apex, flawlessly effective predator even when its eyes are entirely useless. The life cycle of the Moray eel introduces a breathtaking, almost incomprehensible contrast to its heavy, sedentary, rock-bound adult existence. Given their secretive, fiercely guarded nature, the actual spawning events of Moray eels are incredibly rare to witness. However, it is known that when conditions align, these solitary creatures leave their crevices and release massive clouds of eggs and sperm directly into the open, pelagic water column where external fertilization occurs. The resulting embryos do not hatch into miniature eels. Instead, they hatch into a deeply bizarre, completely alien larval form known as a leptocephalus. These larvae are completely flat, ribbon-like, and absolutely transparent, resembling nothing more than a drifting, ghostly leaf of cellophane. They possess no scales, no color, and incredibly primitive organs. For months, and in some species, over a year, these transparent ribbons drift completely at the mercy of the global ocean currents. They are swept across vast, open expanses of the sea, entirely disconnected from the reef. This prolonged pelagic phase is a brilliant evolutionary strategy for massive geographic dispersal, allowing Moray populations to cross incredibly deep oceanic trenches and colonize distant, isolated coral atolls thousands of miles away from their parents. Eventually, triggered by complex environmental cues, the transparent leptocephalus undergoes a radical, rapid metamorphosis. It shrinks, thickens, develops pigment, and transforms into a miniature, perfect replica of the adult eel, finally dropping out of the water column to settle onto a new reef. The profound contrast between this expansive, drifting, translucent infancy and the heavy, muscular, claustrophobic reality of its adult life exemplifies the extreme, diverse strategies employed by marine organisms to balance the need for species distribution with the ultimate requirement for local dominance. As the intense tropical daylight slowly fades and the vibrant, sunlit architecture of the reef transitions into the subdued, deeply shadowy tones of the evening, the nocturnal shift begins. The Moray eel remains perfectly poised within its rocky sanctuary. The surrounding waters are absolutely teeming with frantic, shifting life. Yet, the crevice the eel occupies continues to project a flawless, impenetrable illusion of emptiness. Schools of small, night-foraging fish navigate the reef's intricate, winding pathways, heavily guided by ancient instincts shaped over countless generations of survival. Many will pass safely by the dark hole, but eventually, one will misinterpret the silent cavity. It will seek refuge in the open water and venture just a fraction of an inch too close to the darkness. In that fleeting microscopic moment, the absolute boundary between biological refuge and lethal danger violently dissolves. The Moray eel's true nature is instantly revealed, not merely as an inhabitant of the reef, but as the ultimate, unforgiving architect of its hidden spaces. The enduring image of the Moray eel is one of quiet, coiled menace, a heavily textured, motionless head emerging from the solid stone, jaws rhythmically opening and closing in a silent, breathing testament to the immense, violent life concealed within the rock. The Moray eel embodies the absolute, terrifying power of ambiguity. It survives by physically transforming the absence of light and the illusion of shelter into the ultimate instruments of predation. By turning the very concept of safety into a lethal facade, it completely redefines the rules of refuge within the marine environment. In this subtle, masterful manipulation of spatial perception, the Moray perfectly demonstrates that the most effective, unassailable predators in the ocean are not always those that rapidly pursue their prey in the light, but those that possess the cold, calculating patience to simply wait in the shadows, perfectly hidden in plain sight, until the world inevitably comes to them. A lone Weddell seal rests heavily on a vast, drifting slab of fractured Antarctic ice, seeking a fleeting moment of exhaustion-induced sanctuary from the freezing, violently churning waters below. The seal is completely exposed to the biting wind, but its evolutionary instincts assure it that the surface of the ice represents absolute security. It closes its eyes, lulled into a state of profound, false comfort by the gentle, predictable, rhythmic rising and falling of the ocean swell. The seal's brain processes the movement of the ice as entirely natural, a harmless byproduct of the distant tide and the polar wind. It is a fatal miscalculation. The approaching swell is not born of the wind, and it is not a product of the tide. It is a carefully engineered, algorithmically precise weapon of physical displacement. Within seconds, the tranquil surface of the ocean erupts. A massive, coordinated surge of water violently crashes over the surface of the ice floe, shattering the illusion of safety and effortlessly sweeping the heavy, panic seal directly into the waiting, open jaws below. This is not the desperate, instinctive lunge of a solitary predator operating on raw biological hunger. It is a terrifying, flawless execution of deliberate planning, acoustic communication, and intergenerational cultural knowledge. The orchestrator of this aquatic siege is the orca, universally known as the killer whale. It is an apex predator that survives and absolutely dominates the global ocean not merely through its massive physical prowess, but through a terrifying, highly evolved ability to manipulate perception. The orca turns a fundamental, deeply ingrained expectations of its prey into catastrophic, inescapable vulnerabilities. Across the vast, unbroken expanses of the world's oceans, from the blinding, shattered ice fields of the polar extremes to the warm, heavily navigated temperate coastal waters and the infinite blue of the open pelagic realm, orcas occupy a position of absolute, unchallenged biological supremacy. Their striking, high-contrast black and white coloration, their heavily muscled hydrodynamic bodies, and their towering 6-foot dorsal fins make them among the most universally recognizable marine mammals on the planet. Yet, beneath this iconic, imposing physical appearance lies a level of cognitive and behavioral sophistication that profoundly separates them from nearly all other predators on Earth. Orcas are not simply hunters. They are brilliant aquatic tacticians. They are capable of orchestrating wildly complex, deeply cooperative attacks that actively exploit the sensory blind spots and cognitive limitations of the animals they hunt. Their survival is rooted not in the brute force of their teeth, but in the terrifying, calculating depth of their intelligence, their unbreakable social cohesion, and their unparalleled ability to transform the surrounding environment itself into a weapon of total deception. Central to the orca's absolute domination of the sea is its highly developed, rigidly structured social architecture. Orcas do not wander the ocean alone. They live in tightly knit, deeply stable family groups known as pods. These are not temporary alliances of convenience. These are lifelong, unbreakable biological bonds characterized by intricate emotional connections, synchronized movements, and highly coordinated behavior. The foundation of this social cohesion is an acoustic communication system of staggering complexity. The ocean is an environment where light quickly fails, but sound travels with incredible speed and efficiency. Every individual pod possesses its own unique, highly specific repertoire of vocalizations. Distinct, localized dialects of clicks, whistles, and pulse calls are utterly incomprehensible to orcas from different regions. This localized, acoustic dialect functions as a secure, biological radio network. It facilitates precise, invisible coordination during high-stress hunting scenarios and complex social interactions. Through this continuous acoustic stream, orcas can instantly synchronize their swimming formations, share highly specific, localized information about the trajectory and density of fleeing prey, and execute flanking maneuvers that would be mathematically impossible for a group of solitary, uncoordinated predators. The strength of these profound social bonds also enables something exceedingly rare in the animal kingdom: the direct, intentional transmission of knowledge across generations. The pod is a living library, creating deep-rooted cultural traditions that refine, adapt, and perfect hunting techniques over decades of trial and error. There's perhaps no more terrifying illustration of this cultural intelligence than the intentional, highly choreographed wave-washing behavior observed in the specialized orca populations of the Antarctic. When these apex predators target seals resting on large, isolated ice floes, they do not simply surround the ice and wait. They actively manufacture an environmental catastrophe. A group of 4 or 5 massive orcas will approach the target with remarkable, chilling subtlety. They minimize their acoustic chatter and suppress their hydrodynamic wake, swimming in a tight, perfectly synchronized formation just below the surface. They align their bodies, calculate the distance, the thickness of the ice, and the exact weight of the seal. Then, with terrifying unison, they beat their massive tail flukes and dive. This perfectly synchronized multi-ton displacement of water generates a massive, concentrated, rolling wave that surges forward with unstoppable momentum. The true horror of this tactic relies entirely on the seal's initial, fatal misinterpretation of the approaching swell. The prey's brain categorizes the rising water as a natural, harmless wave, suppressing the urge to flee until the very last fraction of a second. Only when the coordinated, surging wall of water violently crests the edge of the ice floe does the seal recognize the true, biological nature of the threat. But by that time, the physics of the attack are absolute. The ice violently tilts, the water rushes over the surface, and the seal is physically washed into the freezing, chaotic water, where the rest of the pod is already waiting in absolute lethal readiness. This strategy perfectly exemplifies the orca's unparalleled capacity to actively manipulate environmental cues, transforming ordinary, passive ocean dynamics into engineered, lethal weapons. In vastly different regions of the globe, other orca populations employ equally sophisticated, culturally inherited techniques to exploit the collective behavior of massive, schooling fish like herring or sardines. To catch a single, fast-moving fish in the open ocean is an exhausting, inefficient expenditure of energy. Therefore, the orcas do not hunt the fish. they hunt the school. By working in flawless, acoustic cooperation, a pod will aggressively herd millions of frantic fish upward, forcing them toward the surface of the ocean, which acts as an impenetrable physical ceiling. The orcas swim in rapid, tightening spirals around the prey, blowing a continuous, terrifying wall of air bubbles from their blowholes while simultaneously screaming a barrage of deafening, high-intensity clicks and whistles into the water. This acoustic and visual sensory overload completely shatters the navigational instincts of the fish. Terrified and confused, the fish pack themselves into a dense, swirling, hypercompressed sphere known as a bait ball. Once the fish are trapped in this biological singularity, the orcas do not simply swim in and bite. That would scatter the ball. Instead, specialized members of the pod take turns diving into the center of the frantic mass and delivering incredibly powerful, highly targeted slaps with their massive tail flukes. The concussive shockwave of the tail slap instantly stuns or kills dozens of fish simultaneously, allowing the orcas to casually, methodically consume the paralyzed prey as it sinks toward the abyss. This breathtaking division of labor, some individuals tasked with maintaining the bubble barrier, others tasked with herding, and others executing concussive strikes, reflect a level of tactical coordination and strict role specialization that is almost entirely absent in the rest of the predatory marine world. The success of these pelagic hunts depends not on physical speed, but entirely on the orca's brilliant ability to mathematically anticipate and manipulate the collective, panic-driven behavior of their prey, effectively collapsing the very geometry of escape through strategic, cooperative positioning. The biological foundation that allows for these staggering, highly organized behaviors is deeply rooted in the orca's advanced cognitive and sensory capabilities. Possessing one of the largest, most heavily convoluted brains of any marine mammal on the planet, orcas demonstrate remarkable, documented problem-solving abilities, phenomenal long-term memory, and profound, empathetic social awareness. But their true superpower is their acoustic vision. Their echolocation system allows them to perceive their vast, dark environment with a level of three-dimensional precision that rivals human sight. By emitting rapid successions of high-frequency clicks from a specialized organ in their forehead called a melon, and listening to the returning echoes absorbed through their hollow lower jawbones, orcas can essentially see with sound. This biological sonar is so incredibly refined an orca can detect the exact size, shape, speed, and even the internal density of an object from hundreds of yards away in complete pitch-black darkness. They can use echolocation to differentiate between specific species of fish based entirely on the acoustic signature of the fish's internal swim bladder. This supreme sensory acuity enables orcas to seamlessly coordinate incredibly complex maneuvers in zero-visibility conditions, maintaining flawless spatial awareness during chaotic, high-speed cooperative hunts. Furthermore, their immense capacity for social learning and physical imitation facilitates the rapid transmission of cultural knowledge. When a new, innovative hunting tactic is discovered by a single individual, it can be taught, practiced, and eventually permanently absorbed into the pod's cultural identity, ensuring that highly successful survival strategies are preserved and infinitely refined across generations. Perhaps the most compelling, scientifically fascinating aspect of orca biology is the sheer diversity of these hunting techniques exhibited by entirely different, geographically isolated populations, often referred to by biologists as ecotypes. These groups are genetically similar, yet they specialize in entirely distinct prey types and employ completely unique, culturally inherited strategies perfectly tailored to their specific ecological contexts. For example, some orca ecotypes, known as transients, strictly target heavily armored marine mammals, relying on stealth silence and brute physical trauma to drown massive baleen whales, seals, and dolphins. Other ecotypes, the residents, focus exclusively on specific runs of salmon, utilizing constant acoustic chatter and echolocation. There are even highly specialized offshore ecotypes that have evolved the cultural knowledge required to successfully hunt massive, predatory great white sharks, surgically extracting the shark's nutrient-dense liver with terrifying precision while leaving the rest of the carcass to sink. The strict, cultural transmission of these highly specialized behaviors results in distinct populations that live in the exact same ocean, yet possess entirely different dietary preferences, social traditions, and vocal dialects. They essentially create distinct, invisible ecological niches within their own species, refusing to interbreed, or even interact with orcas of a different culture. This phenomenon powerfully underscores the absolute importance of culture and shared knowledge in shaping the evolutionary trajectory of the species, cementing their status as arguably the most behaviorally complex, socially advanced predators on the planet. The orca's deceptive, psychological capabilities extend far beyond coordinated wave washing or acoustic herding. They frequently include the active, deliberate manipulation of prey expectations through highly subtle, deceptive behavioral cues. During certain hunts, particularly when targeting highly intelligent, agile prey like dolphins or porpoises, orcas may intentionally adopt physical movements that appear entirely playful, lethargic, or deeply non-threatening. They will suppress their echolocation clicks and casually swim in loose, uncoordinated patterns, effectively disguising their predatory intent. This strategic, deeply calculated ambiguity reduces the likelihood of triggering an immediate, high-speed escape response from prey. It allows the massive predators to casually close the distance, operating under a cloak of biological disinterest, until the absolute perfect moment of attack. Such behavior reflects a highly advanced theory-of-mind level of understanding regarding cause and effect. The predator actively anticipates exactly how its own physical actions will be interpreted by the mind of its prey. By exploiting these deeply ingrained perceptual biases, orcas effectively stage and direct their attacks in a manner that maximizes the shock of surprise and utterly minimizes any chance of physical resistance. Beyond their terrifying role as the ocean's ultimate hunters, orcas exert a massive, profound ecological influence on the structure of every marine environment they inhabit. As apex predators sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the food web, they actively regulate the populations of their prey, contributing heavily to the overall stability and dynamic balance of marine ecosystems. In many regions, the sudden presence or tragic absence of orca populations has been directly linked to massive, cascading trophic effects that violently alter multiple levels of the food chain. For instance, shifting predation patterns on specific marine mammals can dramatically influence the distribution and foraging behavior of other species, ultimately reshaping the physical structure of entire coastal ecosystems, from the density of kelp forests to the populations of grazing sea urchins. This massive ecological significance underscores the orca's role not merely as a dominant hunter, but as a primary, foundational architect of global marine biodiversity. The incredible resilience of orca populations is heavily anchored by their profound reproductive and social dynamics. Female orcas are among the incredibly rare group of animals on Earth, including humans, that experience extended post-reproductive lifespans. Long after a female has lost the biological ability to bear calves, she continues to live for decades. These older, post-reproductive individuals, the matriarchs, play absolutely critical, life-saving roles within the pod. They act as the living, breathing repositories of deep ecological knowledge. During years of severe environmental hardship or devastating famine, when traditional prey sources vanish, the entire pod turns to the matriarch. She utilizes her decades of accumulated memory to guide the family across vast, unforgiving ocean basins to hidden, historical foraging grounds that the younger generations have never seen. The intergenerational transfer of this critical survival knowledge heavily strengthens the social fabric of the pod and vastly enhances their collective, overall ability to adapt to rapidly changing, hostile environmental conditions. Yet, despite their formidable world-class capabilities, their massive brains, and their unbreakable social bonds, orcas face incredibly significant, unprecedented challenges in a modern, industrialized world. Human activities have introduced threats that even the most intelligent predators cannot outmaneuver. Relentless industrial chemical pollution slowly accumulates in their massive fat reserves, compromising their immune systems and devastating their reproductive success. The massive global overfishing of their highly specific, culturally mandated prey sources threatens entire ecotypes with starvation. But perhaps the most insidious, devastating threat is the invisible rise of catastrophic acoustic pollution. The relentless, deafening roar of massive commercial shipping lanes, the explosive, concussive blast of underwater seismic surveys, and the chaotic noise of industrial marine activities actively blind the orcas. This acoustic smog violently interferes with their delicate echolocation and drowns out the faint, high-frequency calls of their family members, completely disrupting the intricate acoustic coordination that is absolutely essential to their hunting success and their social cohesion. As the freezing, turbulent ocean surface finally calms after the violent, dramatic wave that claimed the unwary seal, the pod of orcas regroups with an almost eerie, serene composure. The dark, freezing water once again appears tranquil, perfectly concealing the calculated, algorithmic precision that just unfolded beneath it. In this quiet, chilling aftermath lies the absolute, undeniable essence of the orca's evolutionary strategy. It is a flawless, terrifying fusion of supreme cognitive intelligence, unbreakable social cooperation, and psychological deception that successfully transforms the very natural rhythms of the sea into unstoppable instruments of predation. The final, enduring image is one of silent, absolute authority, a dark, heavily muscled pod of apex predators gliding effortlessly, shoulder to shoulder, through a freezing blue. Their formidable presence serves as a dark, awe-inspiring reminder that the greatest, most devastating power in the natural world almost never resides in brute, thoughtless force, but in the terrifying, calculating ability to shape the perception of reality and flawlessly orchestrate the unseen. A ripple of fine, volcanic sand suddenly rises from the barren, featureless expanse of seafloor, twisting and undulating into the unmistakable, terrifying silhouette of a highly venomous banded sea snake. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, absolutely nothing about the scene suggests vulnerability. Instead, the undulating form radiates an aura of intense, lethal danger. A passing predatory fish, genetically hardwired over millions of years to fear the deadly bite of marine reptiles, violently arrests its forward momentum. Terrified by the sudden appearance of an apex killer, the predator turns and flees into the murky water, prioritizing its own life over a potential meal. But beneath this flawless, terrifying illusion lies one of the ocean's most physically defenseless, soft-bodied creatures, the Mimic Octopus. This startling, instantaneous transformation is not a simple, passive act of camouflage. It is a deeply calculated, highly dynamic deception, a survival strategy so cognitively sophisticated and physically profound that it fundamentally reshapes the very rules of predator-prey interaction. In an environment where a single second of hesitation can determine life or death, the Mimic Octopus does not merely hide from the world. It completely rewrites the narrative of its own existence, successfully convincing its executioners that attacking it would be a catastrophic, fatal mistake. The coastal waters of the Indo-Pacific, particularly the silty, murky estuaries, volcanic muck plains, and shallow, shifting lagoons of Indonesia, Malaysia, form the unforgiving stage for this extraordinary biological performance. Unlike the vibrant, structurally complex coral reefs that dominate popular imagery of marine life, environments offering countless crevices, shadows, and hard calcium structures for an animal to hide within. These benthic habitats are notoriously unstable, flat, and seemingly devoid of any physical shelter. Visibility is frequently choked by suspended sediment, and the seabed is composed of fine, loose silt that shifts and erases itself with every passing tidal current. For the vast majority of soft-bodied marine organisms, being caught in such a barren, exposed landscape offers no protection. It is an absolute, unavoidable death sentence. But for the Mimic Octopus, this flat, desolate expanse of mud provides a perfect, unobstructed canvas for its illusions. The subdued, monochromatic color palette in the soft, forgiving substrate allow its dramatic transformations to appear entirely seamless, enabling the animal to emerge in the sand as entirely different, highly dangerous creatures with astonishing, terrifying credibility. Biologically classified as the Moctopus mimicus, this incredibly specialized species possesses a deep, complex suite of anatomical adaptations that perfectly enable its theatrical, shape-shifting repertoire. Like other cephalopods, its skin is a high-definition biological display, packed with specialized, neurologically controlled skin cells called chromatophores that allow for rapid, instantaneous changes in color and pattern. These are layered heavily with iridophores and leucophores, which actively manipulate and scatter ambient light to create shimmering or starkly pale effects that heavily enhance the realism of its disguises. However, the true secret to its unparalleled mimicry lies beneath the skin, within a dense, incredibly powerful network of radial and circular muscles. Because the Mimic Octopus entirely lacks a rigid skeleton, it is not bound by the physical, geometric constraints of bone and joint. It operates as a muscular hydrostat, possessing unparalleled, liquid-like control over its own body shape. It can aggressively elongate its arms to impossible lengths, flatten its mantle into a paper-thin disc, or contort its entire mass into complex, branching forms that flawlessly resemble completely unrelated marine species. This rare combination of instantaneous visual shifting and extreme structural flexibility transforms its body into a living, breathing illusion, capable of completely shedding its biological identity in a matter of seconds. One of its most iconic, heavily documented impersonations is that of the banded sea snake, a highly venomous, aggressive predator universally feared by almost every inhabitant of the shallow reef and estuary. When a mimic octopus is caught completely exposed on the open sand and perceives an approaching threat, it does not attempt to ink and flee, which would only trigger a chase response. Instead, it forcefully buries its heavy head and the majority of its body deep beneath the soft sand, leaving only 2 of its 8 arms extended in opposite directions across the seafloor. It instantly changes the pigmentation of these 2 arms to display bold, high-contrast black and white banding. Then, it adopts a precise, sinuous, undulating motion, perfectly replicating the distinct, serpentine swimming pattern of the actual snake. This deception is particularly devastatingly effective against damselfish and other highly territorial species that instinctively avoid marine reptiles. By actively exploiting the pre-existing hardwired fears of its predators, the mimic octopus artificially manufactures a crucial window of safety, vividly demonstrating an evolutionary strategy rooted not in physical defense, but in profound psychological manipulation. Equally remarkable, and perhaps even more visually spectacular, is its flawless imitation of the lionfish, a slow-moving, highly conspicuous species heavily armed with a halo of long, venomous dorsal spines that easily deter even the most massive, determined predators. In this transformation, the octopus abandons the seafloor entirely. It hovers in the water column, spreading all 8 of its arms wide outward and flattening its central body to create the exact illusion of radiating, dangerous fins. Simultaneously, its chromatophores erupt into a brilliant, disruptive pattern of contrasting brown and white stripes that perfectly mirrors the lionfish's universal warning coloration. The absolute brilliance of this mimicry lies in its multimodal accuracy. The predators of the Indo-Pacific do not rely solely on flat visual cues. They analyze movement, posture, and spatial behavior. By perfectly replicating the slow, arrogant, drifting movement of the untouchable lionfish, the octopus crafts a three-dimensional deception that is absolutely convincing across multiple sensory channels, drastically increasing its chances of survival by commanding the respect normally reserved for a highly toxic killer. Another frequently observed, highly complex disguise is that of flatfish, such as a toxic sole or a bottom-dwelling flounder. By aggressively compressing its entire body into a flattened, leaf-like shape, pulling its arms tightly together, and trailing them streamlined behind its mantle, the mimic octopus glides smoothly just millimeters above the substrate. The transformation serves a brilliant, highly effective dual purpose. Not only does it help the octopus completely avoid detection by pelagic predators patrolling the waters above, but also allows the octopus to actively approach its own prey with minimal suspicion. Small crabs, shrimp, and gobies, fully accustomed to benign, non-threatening presence of common flatfish, often completely fail to recognize the impending threat until the illusion is violently dropped. In this context, the mimicry ceases to be a purely defensive shield. It is aggressively weaponized as an offensive hunting strategy, illustrating the terrifying versatility of deception as a multifunctional ecological tool. The absolute success of these dramatic impersonations depends entirely on the cognitive and sensory abilities of the predators themselves. In the chaotic, unforgiving environment of the ocean, predators rely on incredibly rapid, automated decision-making processes shaped by millions of years of evolutionary experience and trauma. When a hunter is suddenly confronted with a distinct visual and behavioral signature of a highly dangerous, toxic, or unpalatable species, biological hesitation or immediate avoidance becomes the only safe, logical response. The mimic octopus flawlessly exploits this deeply ingrained, instinctive behavior, effectively hijacking the predator's own neural circuitry against it. This interaction represents one of the most sophisticated, extreme examples of Batesian mimicry ever discovered, a biological phenomenon in which a completely harmless, vulnerable organism gains total protection by perfectly resembling a harmful one. However, the Mimic Octopus extends this evolutionary concept to an entirely unprecedented level by employing multiple, dynamically shifting models rather than relying on a single fixed, lifelong resemblance, making it the most versatile, cognitively advanced mimic known in the entire animal kingdom. Beyond its staggering visual transformations, the Mimic Octopus demonstrated a level of behavioral flexibility that suggests a profoundly nuanced, almost computational understanding of its environment. Extensive scientific observations strongly indicate that the octopus does not simply cycle through its disguises at random. It actively, deliberately selects specific impersonations based entirely on a specific type of threatened encounters. For instance, when the octopus is aggressively harassed by a damselfish, a species known to be heavily preyed upon by banded sea snakes, the octopus will almost exclusively deploy the sea snake mimicry to terrifying effect. This heavily context-dependent response implies a form of active, adaptive decision-making where the octopus instantaneously assesses the precise biological nature of the risk and strategically chooses the absolute most effective psychological deterrent. While it is highly unlikely that the animal possesses conscious philosophical awareness in the human sense, its behavior reflects an incredibly highly evolved, decentralized neural system capable of rapidly processing complex environmental cues and outputting flawless, targeted behavioral responses. The evolutionary origins of such phenomenally sophisticated mimicry are deeply rooted in the intense, uncompromising selective pressures of the Indo-Pacific shallow, exposed coastal ecosystems. These barren, silted environments host a highly diverse, relentless array of visual predators, including massive groupers, sharp-eyed barracudas, moray eels, and specialized cephalopod hunters, each armed with distinct, highly effective hunting strategies. For a soft-bodied, protein-rich organism completely lacking protective armor, venomous spines, or sustained swimming speed, survival on the open sand demands radical, unprecedented biological innovation. Over countless, brutal generations, the unforgiving engine of natural selection ruthlessly favored only those rare individuals capable of increasingly convincing, dynamic deceptions. The modern result is a species whose primary, ultimate defense is not physical resilience or aggression, but the absolute, masterful ability to manipulate the perception of reality itself, effectively transforming profound physical vulnerability into an impenetrable, strategic advantage. This heavy, absolute reliance on deception also heavily influences the Mimic Octopus's daily interactions with its own prey. Unlike heavy ambush predators that must remain perfectly still and depend entirely on stealth, or pelagic hunters that rely on exhausting speed, the Mimic Octopus can actively, openly approach potential meals entirely under guise of harmless or heavily intimidating species. By masquerading as a slow-moving flatfish or a drifting piece of uninteresting debris, it drastically reduces the likelihood of triggering the rapid, panic-induced escape responses of small crustaceans and bottom-dwelling fish. Once it glides within absolute striking distance, the octopus abruptly sheds its disguise, employing its highly dexterous arms and powerful, independently controlled suckers to envelop and capture the prey with terrifying, inescapable efficiency. This dual, seamless application of dynamic mimicry, both as an impenetrable defensive shield and an invisible offensive weapon, deeply underscores its role as a comprehensive, holistic survival system rather than a singular, isolated biological trick. The broader ecological implications of the Mimic Octopus extend far beyond its own individual survival. By constantly, actively influencing and manipulating predator behavior, it contributes deeply to the wildly complex, shifting web of interactions that ultimately define these marine ecosystems. Predators that repeatedly encounter perfectly convincing, highly toxic mimics may eventually alter their own foundational hunting strategies, potentially affecting the distribution, foraging patterns, and overall behavior of countless other species across the estuary. Additionally, the mere presence of such an incredibly versatile, highly specialized mimic highlights the absolute, foundational importance of extreme biodiversity in maintaining ecological balance. Every single species in the estuary, whether it acts as predator, prey, or perfect impersonator, plays an absolutely critical role in shaping the ongoing, relentless evolutionary dynamics of the benthic community. Despite its extraordinary world-class capabilities, the Mimic Octopus remains profoundly, tragically vulnerable to rapid environmental change. The delicate, highly specific coastal habitats of the Indo-Pacific are currently under massive, unprecedented threat from devastating human activities. Severe industrial pollution, catastrophic habitat destruction, the aggressive clearing of vital mangrove forests, and the relentless, creeping effects of climate change are violently altering the very environments this creature relies on. Changes in coastal sedimentation patterns, degrading water quality, and the sudden collapse of local prey availability all heavily influence the absolute viability of these muddy, fragile ecosystems. As a species so intricately, perfectly adapted to a highly specific set of environmental conditions and a very specific cast of local predators, the mimic octopus serves as a deeply sensitive, highly critical indicator of overall ecosystem health. Its continued long-term survival depends entirely on the rigorous preservation of the delicate, unseen balance that sustains the incredibly rich, often overlooked biodiversity of these silty, shallow regions. The deep, evolutionary story of the mimic octopus fundamentally challenges our most basic, conventional notions of defense, dominance, and survival in the natural world. Rather than relying on the brute, physical metrics of strength, speed, heavily calcified armor, or devastating toxicity, it perfectly exemplifies the raw, unmatched power of perception and profound evolutionary advantages of extreme cognitive and behavioral flexibility. Its terrifying ability to flawlessly assume multiple, entirely distinct identities transforms the very concept of camouflage from a passive, static background matching tool into a highly dynamic, aggressively responsive psychological weapon, one that actively, continuously shapes and dictates the terms of engagement between predator and prey. This incredible strategy highlights the profound, deeply underestimated influence of information, visual data, and deception in ecological systems, proving that in the ocean, the successful interpretation and manipulation of biological signals can be vastly more critical than any physical capability. As the silty, cloudy waters of the estuary slowly settle in the aggressive, sweeping tidal current begins to ease, the brilliant, terrifying illusion suddenly dissolves. The mimic octopus smoothly retracts its arms, drops the high-contrast bands of the sea snake, and allows the vibrant, warning stripes of the lionfish to simply melt away. It rapidly compresses its muscular body, instantly resuming its unassuming mottled brown form, blending once again perfectly into the absolute anonymity of the flat, featureless seabed. The massive predator, momentarily deceived and deeply unnerved by the encounter, moves on into the gloom, searching the barren sand for a much less enigmatic, far more predictable meal. In this quiet, deeply settling aftermath, the true, profound significance of the encounter becomes unmistakably apparent. Absolute survival in the unforgiving, endless expanse of the ocean is not solely determined by raw physical dominance, the sharpness of teeth, or the ability to outswim death. It is determined by the masterful, brilliant ability to completely manipulate perception and ruthlessly exploit the deepest, most ancient instincts of others. The mimic octopus stands as an eternal, living testament to this principle, embodying an evolutionary masterpiece where profound deception is not merely a desperate tactic, but an entire, comprehensive way of life. It is a breathtaking, living demonstration that in the relentless, highly competitive, and unforgiving theater of the sea, the absolute most powerful weapon an organism can possess is the flawless, terrifying art of becoming something else entirely. The natural world is an endless theater of survival, deception, and evolutionary mastery. But there are still countless mysteries hidden in the deep, waiting to be uncovered. If you want to continue this journey with us and decode the greatest secrets of our planet, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Earth's documentary. Every shadow holds a story, and we will be there to bring it into the light. Join us for the next expedition.